valuable, as would DNS, as would DHCP. So like a lot of protocols just last a long time because the biggest feature of a protocol is interoperability. So the more people who are talking on it, and it is very big network effect. I think with Bitcoin you have a Lindy effect. It has trust that's been around, and then it has security properties, and that's the biggest network, the most people keeping it secure, the most miners keeping it secure.
All right, let's get down to the New York Stock Exchange. Jim Cramer joins us right now. Jim, a lot of great earnings out this morning. If you look at Merck, if you look at Pfizer, if you look at MasterCard. MasterCard just showing that consumers are still spending. What do you think when you add it all up?
Yeah, look, MasterCard was great. Visa was great. PayPal was great. These are all consumer stocks. Merck was down ridiculously last week. Bristol Myers put a great quarter, and they've got a good combination. I'm not against what they've got but Keytruda may be the biggest selling drug of all time. Did $3 billion for Merck. I think this drug is a remarkable anti-cancer drug. So we've got 3 for 3. We got MasterCard, we got Pfizer, and I've got to tell you, I think Merck's best in show. On the other hand, we've got Grubhub, and I think Grubhub, if you had a headline, I would have put, "Please don't buy our stock, you will lose money," because why mince words? I mean,
right.
The user is promiscuous.
You're right. Promiscuous users, they're using other services. We don't own them.
Yeah, it was.
I should have put a ring on it.
That was a suboptimal situation.
Right.
I'd rather own. I don't know, any coin. Bitcoin doesn't matter. The thing that they're up against private companies that are playing with free money, and that's exactly what DoorDash is, what Postmates is. So I feel bad for them. I mean, Maloney's got his hands full, but promiscuous, it really is true. Do you really care who delivers your food?
No.
I mean, do you care whether it's
whoever gets it there the fastest, the cheapest. Amen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always a commodity business. They have locked up all the big chains, but it doesn't matter. There's no loyalty. There is no loyalty in that business, and that's why the diners are promiscuous. Why did he have to pick that word? That word is basically saying, please don't touch our stock.
Right. It tells you there is no moat. Hey, Jim, thank you. We're going to see you in just a few minutes. Tonight on Mad Money, by the way, don't miss the CEO of Zebra. Let's make that. The CEO of Zebra tonight on Mad Money. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Come on, Jim.
It's another Tuesday afternoon, yet another windy day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick and explore tropical rainforests. Fly from London Gatwick to Costa Rica with British Airways from £218 each way based on a return fare. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun. With British Airways, incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
London, switch to Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network, and Be Unlimited, because the best phones deserve the best network and our new unlimited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Max download speeds apply to unlimited data. Best network as voted by readers of trusted reviews. Terms at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
What can you get from Tesco for £1 each this Halloween?
A pumpkin.
More.
A spooky pumpkin cup.
More.
Ghostly balloons. Spine-tingling spider webs. Ghoulish plates and napkins.
More. Yes, it is scary what you can get for just £1 each this Halloween.
Tesco. Every little helps. Available in selected larger stores.
Hello? This is Dustin. I found something. Is anybody there?
We hear you, Dustin. With Sky Q, you can easily catch up on epic Netflix shows like Stranger Things and then watch award-winning Sky originals like Chernobyl. Get Sky and Netflix all in one place on Sky Q for one surprisingly low price. Just £25 a month. Visit sky.com and join today. Offer ends November 14th. 18-month minimum terms. Prices may change during contract. Requires Sky Q box connected to broadband. Set up from £20. Further terms apply.
Hi, I'm back. I just set a personal best on my park run. Feels great.
That's lovely, Mike. I
think you've earned the right to put all the bins out.
Hey?
With Vitality Life Insurance, you get properly rewarded when you're active. In fact, you could save over £730 every year in discounts and rewards from our partners. Join over 1 million customers. Just search Vitality Life. Vitality. Positively different. Annual savings available with certain plans and are dependent on members' usage of rewards available. Terms and conditions apply.
I want to thank our guest host this morning. Ben Horowitz has a new book out. What You Do is Who You Are. And real quick, in 10 seconds, culture. Do you talk about it, or is it a lead by example story, or you think you have to talk about it?
No, it's definitely not lead by example or talk about it. So culture is not a set of beliefs, it's a set of actions. And how you get a company to behave and everybody in the company to behave the way you want them to when you're not looking, when you're not there, very difficult and complicated, and that's what the book is about.
Thank you. Good luck with the book. Ben Horowitz, make sure you join us tomorrow. Squawk on the Street begins right now.
I'm Carl Quintanilla with Jim Cramer at the New York Stock Exchange. David Faber's waking up early in L.A. ahead of Warner Media Day. In the meantime, stocks look to take a breather at the open after Monday's record high. Truly a mixed bag of earnings today, from GM and MasterCard to Grubhub and Beyond Meat. 10-year 183, Case-Shiller up 3.2 year on year. Our roadmap begins with Record Watch, the S&P at that all-time high, Dow and the NASDAQ not far behind. Plus, as we said, streaming wars, HBO Max details coming today. David is live in Los Angeles ahead of the Warner Media Investor Day, and some tough questions for Boeing. What to expect as Dennis Muhlenberg testifies to Congress later today. We're going to start, though, with the markets the day after the S&P hits that 12th all-time high and the 14th record close of 2019. Jim, halfway through earnings season here. What does it all mean?
Well, I think you go back, and I was going back and looking at some of the big billionaire hedge fund managers and what they've been saying, and they all, I think, almost in unison said, look, this is a bubble. You got to be very careful. It can't last. Their numbers can go back into the negative, but the companies just aren't letting it happen. The companies, for the most part, the biggest companies are reporting great numbers, and the classic one is Merck. I mean, last week, Merck got hit all the way down to 79.80 when Bristol Myers unveiled a cocktail, Opdivo and Yervoy, that was very positive. But Keytruda is doing, I don't know if people understand this, $3 billion this quarter. This is, heaven help you have cancer. I mean, it's such a terrible illness, but this is really an extraordinary drug, and it's Merck's drug, and it raises forecast dramatically. Merck, big Dow stock. Pfizer, really unbelievable. Very good. I can't even see how Pfizer did it.
I mean, on a day where Merck and Pfizer both raised their full-year guide, but on a day where Cummins cuts its full-year revenue guide, do you stick with the defensive still?
No, I think that you have to just say, listen, there are some guys that that really have figured out what to do. Let's see how much Cummins is down, because they missed on revenue. But the fact is Caterpillar was horrible last week. Horrible. And the stock hit 140 yesterday. And Morgan Stanley had downgraded it right before it came out. And you really started thinking, it's going to be awful. And the stock didn't go down. So I'm a little suspicious about giving up Cummins right here. When you see revenue declining 2%, your instinct is to say sell it. Now, the one thing is we've got to hear this company, there's Caterpillar so committed to the dividend. They call themselves a dividend aristocrat. There are plenty of industrials that are doing quite well. So you may not even need Cummins. Cummins has done well in China, like Emerson. Even 3M's coming back. So I just caution people not to throw out the cyclicals. You would have sold it. You would have sold Caterpillar.
Absolutely, yeah. It feels like a washout given what they printed.
I think the exciting thing is these semiconductors. I mean, NXPI reported a number. Now, NXPI, there were 6 different line items. The only number that was actually better was the Internet of Things. But that's where Texas Instruments was weakest, which is why you see NXPI going up. Rick Clemmer, who is a fabulous executive, the CEO of NXPI, calling the
Well, his line is, while the short-term global demand environment appears to have stabilized, the intermediate demand environment continues to be uncertain and is not markedly improved. I mean, it's not an all clear, is it?
Well, I mean, the market's reacting to the beginning statement. But remember, NXPI was at 90 after the walkaway, the takeover. I do think that NXPI is just sensational. I don't want to pay up here. Do you think David has anything to say about NXPI, or is he probably more focused on Hollywood?
Let's check in with David Faber, who's got a full day of media ahead.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's not until 3 o'clock our time that Warner's going to roll out their latest offering, of course, in these streaming wars that we've all followed so closely at that anchor desk back at the NYSE. So we'll get details there. Pricing certainly going to be very important. What else is going to be involved? What other content, of course, is going to be exclusive to that platform, which we've talked about in the past, is having a lot of library time, but sort of introducing some interesting questions for Time Warner parent AT&T and the guy who's running all of this, John Stankey, as they bring this thing into the marketplace, how to distinguish it, how to also price it in terms of what HBO is currently at and what you're actually going to get. So a lot of questions there. It's very much wrapped up, of course, in the future of AT&T, which we talked a lot about yesterday, guys, which went up a lot on that new plan to obviously increase margins over the next 3 years by 200 basis points, increase revenues by 1 to 2%. That may not sound like much, but it could be a heavy lift for them. More on the revenue side, frankly, many people expect, than actually taking costs out of the business. But this is certainly an important part of that overall plan. So we'll be following that. As for NXP, Jim, yeah, I don't have much of anything. I know we want to get to Google or Alphabet, I guess, which certainly, I don't know what your thoughts are. It's funny, in talking to a couple of people who own the stock this morning, they were more positive, perhaps, than others seemed to be after the bell yesterday when Alphabet reported, just talking about what looked to be a decent operating margin. The markdown in Uber, that $550 million litigation-related expense or tax expense, perhaps masking what were not bad numbers. Curious to get your thoughts.
Well, look, there are 11 firms that follow it in official status. 10 boosted their price targets. Ruth Porat, not as bad as Maloney in terms of Grubhub saying, please don't buy us, it would really hurt you. Ruth Porat, I always have trouble falling asleep. But there's 4 days a year I don't have to worry. And those are the 4 days that Alphabet reports. Because if you try to read their thing, I mean, even during a really good Monday Night Football game, it can put you to sleep. It's remarkable. It's better than Klonopin, which is a very serious drug you can get addicted to. And thank God Ruth Porat only speaks 4 days a year. Because this is the most, I mean, it's like, hey, well, you know, the cloud and unplayed, well, you got the YouTube.
Cost per click, yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's just, I can't read it anymore. I can't.
Well, the headlines are they haven't missed on the bottom line in 7 quarters, and it's the highest quarterly expenses ever.
Well, I mean, look, they have to in order to be able to keep cloud going. I mean, they're talking about getting cloud back into action. They don't mention a lot of big clients. I also felt that, David, I'm curious to hear you say this. If you are the Justice Department and you're thinking about breaking up Alphabet, I think you go through this thing and you say, well, gee, I don't know. They seem to be doing okay. They're not setting the world on fire. This almost is like a brief for the defense about why you don't need to do anything, because we're like, okay, we're not kings.
We're not killing it anymore, so you don't have to break us up. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's kind of the way it reads.
To try to make Macon Del Rahim a little less combative.
Well, I was going to ask you about Macon Del Rahim. If HBO decides they're going to make it $3, then AT&T rules the world. I mean, you know, Del Rahim, a lot of people are Del Rahim is determining a lot of these earnings.
It's going to happen. No, it's true. No? Yeah, I don't see them going down to that price. I'm not sure what that would mean for all of us who are paying our cable provider a lot more money for HBO, but that's a key question. Listen, you know, breaking it up, I don't know, Jim, what's the sum of the parts anyway? I mean, you know, and all, it's as unlikely and as long as it would take, should it ever even come to fruition, that the Justice Department would move to actually bring litigation against them to break up. I mean, how many years in the future it would be, but what are the other parts worth? What's Waymo
I don't know.
worth?
Verily, I increasingly see Verily is doing something in healthcare. They're talking about Waymo, cars all over the place in Phoenix. Obviously, YouTube is interesting property, but it is really hard to untangle these things from the sense of view of like these other bets. They're obviously designed just to be able to take long-term positions that can lose money from that'll kingdom come. And I just think that there is very little here to make me feel like it'll trade higher, because it was already trading. Trade higher on a breakup basis. It should trade higher on an earnings basis. It was a great quarter.
You think so?
The only people who didn't know it was a great quarter were people in Alphabet.
Well, it's more expensive on a forward basis than Apple or Facebook.
Well, I mean, look, they have $120 billion in cash. I mean, $120 billion.
Still growing over 20%.
How many countries have $120 billion? it is extraordinary. This is a company that is doing so well, but does not know how to. I've decided it's not that they don't know how to tell the story. They don't feel the need to. There's a line in the conference call where Ruth says, the company says, we don't manage the business to maximize quarterly results. Well, you bet they don't. I know the secret, David. I know the secret to reading the conference call. Crystal meth.
Yeah, what is it?
You use crystal meth, you get it. It's like Breaking Bad. That's the only way to do it. I can't find a way to read through this. They don't want you to like the stock. They don't. Now, they're not like Matt Maloney, which was the worst letter in history. The promiscuous diner is making it so they're not using our product.
You're talking about Grub now. Grubhub, which is down 30%.
It should be down more than that. I mean, it should be down more than that because that letter says, listen, we're not in a good business. I mean, that's very. Ruth
decided to use the word?
She didn't say we're not in a good business. At no point
decided
did
to
she
use
say
the
we're
word
not
promiscuous. When did that become a word associated with Grubhub?
Who would ever say
promiscuous? What is that?
Business. Hey, Beyond Meat said we're in a good business.
Well, between Beyond Meat, Grub, and Shopify this morning, there's some landmines on the table.
Shopify was good. 1 million customers. 45% growth. Gross market value, 48% growth. 14.8. My wife says I hit the things too hard all the time. But they have a loss. But they are spending money in order to grow. Now Wall Street hates that. They don't want people to spend any money, and they want to go. I defy Shopify. I defy the sellers of Shopify. You will regret that you sold it. You don't know what you're doing. I like the stock. Unless you're Ray Dalio, you shouldn't sell it. All right, you shouldn't sell it.
Dalio's had some comments in Saudi Arabia about scary times ahead.
Yeah, scary times.
Once
he made
again.
me feel, once again, with 1934, and then the nationalists, and then...
Today's the anniversary of Black Tuesday, 1929.
Well, it doesn't look like that's going to happen again. Happy anniversary. The headlines are great on that, but even the Times put on that.
Yes.
There was no fake news when the Times didn't like that day.
No, they were a good paper then. Right?
Yeah. RCA stock really got hit.
When we come back, Boeing's Dennis Muhlenberg is going to face Congress for the first time since the crashes of those two 737 MAX jets that killed 346 people. He's before Senate Commerce today. We're going to bring you live coverage when that begins in about 50 minutes. In the meantime, looking for a little bit of a pause here. Futures are pretty steady. More squawk on the street from the NYC is back after a break.
This CNBC program is sponsored by Payden and Regal, offering global investment solutions.
Tomorrow is just waiting to be created, to be reinvented and redefined. And it's those who dare to push the world forward, discover and reshape markets, and embrace the possibilities of data that will reimagine our potential and transform society as we know it. With new ideas and new technology, get there with NASDAQ.
Imagine being able to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it. Sandals, more quality inclusions than any other resorts on the planet. Save up to 65%. Call 1-800-SANDALS.
In a changing environment, consistency keeps us on track. Columbia Threadneedle Investments.
Looking for the best rewards credit cards? Introducing CNBC Select, the authority on all things credit cards. We do the research, you reap the rewards. Head on over to cnbc.com/select and take control of your money.
Who's able to thrive at this stage in the business cycle? Who's struggling to hold their own in the worst economy in 2 years? Who's in trouble? Who's in much better shape than you'd expect thanks to savvy management? These are the real questions.
Hi, I'm Hanno. I created Gabi because most people overpay on car insurance. Gabi is a free tool that saves you money by finding the best deal. Gabi users save more than $800 per year on average. Go to Gabi.com and stop overpaying for car insurance.
You went to college? You're smart. So why are you getting ripped off on your student loans? At Credible.com, we've helped tens of thousands of people save money by refinancing their student loans. In 3 minutes, we'll get you actual rates from multiple lenders. We could save you hundreds of dollars a month by refinancing to a lower rate. Don't get ripped off on your student loans. Let's focus on your future, not your debt.
Visit Credible.com and in 3 minutes, see how much you could save.
Hi, I'm Hanno. I created Gabi because most people overpay on car insurance. Gabi is a free tool that saves you money by finding the best deal. Gabi users save more than $800 per year on average. Go to Gabi.com and stop overpaying for car insurance.
Beyond Meat tumbling in the pre-market despite better than expected results, including a first ever quarterly profit. The company says it would need to offer more discounts to deal with growing competition. This is what Ethan Brown said on Squawk about an hour ago.
If you look at our velocity this quarter over the same period last year, we're up 144%. And people say that competition is coming. It's been here. We've been competing for a long time. We feel very comfortable about where we are. We have a myopic focus on doing one thing, which is building a perfect piece of meat directly from plants. We're not beholden to a supply chain that's tied to a traditional industry. We're not competing among different divisions. That is our sole focus, and we'll continue to execute well against that.
So they actually raised their sales guide. Right. Is this more about the lockup expiration?
Yeah, this was a great conference call. That Miss Joyous, he's a great proselytizer for what he does. Talking about he's really rebutting a lot of presumptions. Well, you think there's a lot of salt. Well, let me tell you how much salt there is in this. You think that there's a lot of fat. Well, let me give you this. There's a lot of cholesterol. I felt fabulous about this quarter. It's just that the problem is there's so much stock coming to market. The McDonald's test, we don't have an answer. We know that a lot of people ask about Tim Hortons, why Tim Hortons didn't, took it out. The Dunkin' many times mentioned. There is a lot of competition. This guy is an evangelist. He says, why do we have to get the protein through the mouth and then the other part of the cow? Why can't we just get it right to us? And, he makes so much sense. He's crystal clear. He's so devoted. And he is, my friends who work at Whole Foods, they swear by him. They think he is the man who is trying to change the whole food chain. I wish you could just vote on a great guy rather than have to deal with the stock, because he's a great guy. He's got a great story.
Stock's up 250% from the IPO at 25.
Well, there wasn't enough stock. They did what I call a sliver deal. They didn't issue enough stock to begin with. He felt. I remember when he did the secondary offering, he was trying to please all. He did. He priced it way in the hole. If you bought it, you could flip it and make money, but. Look, there's too much stock. It's going to settle. It's not like it belongs at this level. But I can tell you that there is no doubt in my mind, this guy's here to stay. And I know Nestle's has got a good product. Tyson, I've had their chicken products, extraordinary. I didn't really care for the Nestle's product. They're going to come out with a better product. I've had this I've had his Ethan steak. I've had Ethan, in pasta. I have had a fabulous dish. It caramelizes very well. It's easily cooked. My vegetarian daughter loves it. He's got some, but what I love best about it is not for vegetarians. It's for people who want a better way to eat protein.
Well, David, you still got consumer groups. I don't know if you saw this full-page ad in the Times yesterday saying that plant-based meat is ultra-processed, still heavily processed.
Well, we have talked about that and the peace slurry and what is actually behind, or the amount of ingredients and chemicals to some extent that are actually in these. But we've made the point, I think, and Jim, you have, that you're not necessarily doing this for health reasons as much as you're doing it as a meat replacement for other reasons that have to do with the planet and things of that nature. And I think your point about the lack of supply is sort of one of the key ones here, as we've watched this stock soar and then come back down to earth in recent weeks, is simply there was never enough stock out there initially, and that run-up was extraordinary, and we followed it so closely, but it was really sort of based on just the lack of supply for the stock itself.
Yeah, that was really it. I've got to tell you, a lot of people are saying to me, Jim, if it's so good, why is the stock down? And it is supply and demand. There's just a ton of stock for sale. But in terms of being competitor versus Impossible versus Nestle versus Tyson, which, by the way, was up very big yesterday because of a poultry lift ban in China, this is a very solid story. You know, it's funny. I'm going to say it's going to sound really stupid, but there's a big anti-cow movement. Cows use a lot of, it's like cows are like fracking.
They eat a ton of grain, right? They produce a lot of methane.
Son of a bitch, cows.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. When I look at cows, they just seem to be sitting and eating.
Noisy.
I'm going to go buy a cow, sitting and eating.
Not to mention the end of their life usually often doesn't end well.
Yeah, it ends with that bolt in the head, which is certainly a suboptimal way to go. I do find that when you speak with people about this, they say, why the heck do we need cows? Like, enough with cows. And I'm like, I'm old school. Like, cows seem to be part of nature. Cows are big polluters. Second only to natural gas companies. Someone actually said that to me.
Jim,
Elsie.
Let's pivot here for a moment to Boeing, because it's going to be a big day for Dennis Muhlenberg in front of Senate Commerce. Questions about sort of the balance of regulation between the regulators and the companies who thought that they could handle this sort of on their own.
I thought that the testimony, we read the testimony beforehand, has enough mea culpa in it to feel that I felt better.
He says we made mistakes.
We made mistakes. I've been waiting for him to just come out and say, listen, we made mistakes. I think they have a good system to be able to have recompense, at the same time recognizing when people die, there is no money equivalent. I feel like that it's not about redundancy, like Senator Cruz said, but I thought he could have. This is testimony that I think is about as good as you're going to get from a CEO in a very tough position. Every day, of course, I mean, I go back and forth with Boeing. Every day there's some new guy who says that the FAA was owned by them. I come back and say, well, the FAA does not, to me, seem like a bunch of captured regulators, but that's a narrative that the newspapers don't believe. They think the FAA is owned by Boeing and they didn't have the resources and Boeing cut corners. I think that I'm taking my cue from Doug Parker, who said he'd be happy to have his wife and kids fly with him on that plane right now. Now you can say, oh, he's self-interested. I don't know. I don't think he's self-interested in dying.
Do you believe Gary Kelly when he says that they'll talk about diversifying their fleet at Southwest?
I think you have to. I think that
you don't think it's posturing to get a better price.
Well, I mean, Doug Parker says that they're owed more than $400 million. So I think that Gary Kelly, I mean, everyone's going to submit a bill to Boeing. That's why I think a lot of people are surprised that Boeing maintained its dividend. Boeing has great cash flow, but they owe a lot of people a lot of money. They're going to have to make good, or Airbus. Now, the one thing about Airbus is they don't have enough planes either.
Right.
Nobody's making enough planes.
It's a long wait. Yeah. And so with Boeing at 340, does that feel like a cat situation where bad news comes and stock stops going down on it?
I think that I got the impression from speaking with 4 airline CEOs that it's a first quarter, they'll be flying. Now, obviously, no guarantees to the rest of the world, blah, blah, blah. But I do believe that we are at the point now where we're further along in terms of bad. How many more revelations are there? I think the nadir was that tape, that text message, which really, the New York Times said that he lied. And when you parse everything, and I've gone over this and over this and over this with the good people from Boeing, it is, look, if I had known about this one thing, which is not the thing that caused the crash, then I would not have said this. And so I think that we're now in the period where Boeing's overly hated. Could the stock go down? I want to see a forecast of how much they owe. They owe a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, maybe we're going to get to a point here as we wait for, I think, Muhlenberg in a moment, to where we start talking more about how they're going to market its return, right? Looking at passenger interest in flying on it versus not flying on it. Are they going to ask, what are we going to be on today?
It's a big issue. Sure. And I think that Americans, though, do have shorter memories about plane crashes than people think. I covered a terrible plane crash when I was a crime and homicide reporter, and it was a PSA plane got hit by a small plane, and people were just saying people would never fly again. And there was this horrible Chicago to Chicago flight that I followed. It's an infamous Chicago to Chicago because it crashed in Chicago. I thought once again, after I wrote the story, no one would ever fly again. No one even remembers those. They don't remember the Constellation plane that crashed over New York City. I remember because I covered plane crashes. I covered a horrible plane crash in Pensacola. And every one of them made me think no one will ever fly again. And people did.
People do. David, thoughts from you? I think Muhlenberg might make a statement here before the actual hearing begins.
You know, I guess I just wonder, listen, we've seen so many of these types of hearings, and it is as much theater as anything else, but it is awfully important, one would expect, for the future of this particular executive, how they handle themselves, how they handle the questions, and, you know, what the public perception is. Jim, is Muhlenberg sort of fighting for his job to a certain extent based on his performance today in front of Congress?
I don't think so. I think that when I look at the board members and canvass, I get the sense that people say that the last round of opprobrium was undeserved, and he should have another shot here to be able to tell the story. I do believe that he has better relationships with some of the airlines than people realize. I think, I'm not saying his job is safe because we got to see how much he owes. But I am saying that the board feels he overreached. The media overreached the last time they attacked him. And this is a very conciliatory, non-combative, fall on your sword speech he's about to give, which the board wants. There's no hubris in this speech, believe me.
Well, Kevin McAllister's gone, who ran commercial.
Yeah.
And Muhlenberg's lost his chairmanship role.
Right.
You think that's enough?
For the moment, yes. Look, I think that the bad headlines are going to run out. I think there's some people on the board who really, like there's a fellow from Amgen, Bob Bradway. He has had to deal with FDA, which is not, it's not like the FAA exactly, but he's had to deal with this, and he's very supportive of Muhlenberg. So I don't know. I kind of feel like that he's in a situation where he's okay right now. That split was a tough one on him.
Covering this for us, along with the GM earnings today, is our own Phil LeBeau, as we look for an entrance out of Muhlenberg here. Phil, your thoughts and sort of, I don't know, where's your head right now on return to service?
Well, they believe that it'll be return to service, meaning certified by the FAA by the end of the year. And that may still happen. There is certainly a possibility that could happen. But in terms of the flying public, that's not going to happen until early next year. And guys, as we speak, Dennis Muhlenberg, the CEO of Boeing, is walking in. He has a statement he's going to make before the Senate hearing.
Phil, let's listen to Dennis Muhlenberg.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We look forward to the hearing and very focused on everything we can do to continue to enhance aviation safety. But first and foremost, today, on the anniversary of Lion Air Flight 610, I think first and foremost it's important that we remember the lives lost and again express our deepest sympathies to the families and loved ones. And we will never forget, and that will be our reminder as we look to aviation safety and the future.
Dennis, what do you say to the families, the victims' families who say, you coming here is too little too late?
Yeah, Phil, again, on this day, our deepest sympathies go with these families. And we've thought long and hard about both of the accidents that have occurred. We've learned a lot as a company. We're humbled. It has only amplified our focus on safety going forward. And as I said, we're never going to forget.
But can you guarantee this would never happen again once this plane gets recertified?
Phil, we're going to commit to doing everything we can to ensure accidents like this never happen again. We have made updates to the MAX where we believe accidents like this will not happen again. And we're never going to stop focusing on safety and continuously improving.
Mr. Muhlenberg, a lot of families want to see you resign.
I'm focused on the job at hand. You know, I came to Boeing because we care about building safe airplanes for the world. That's what it's always been about. These two accidents occurred on my watch, and I have a keen sense of responsibility to see that through. Will
you resign?
That's not where my focus is. My focus is on the job at hand, focused on safety, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure safe flight.
But Dennis, have there been discussions with the board that maybe once this is certified and the plane returns to service, it's time for you to transition out of the CEO job?
Phil, those aren't discussions that I'm involved in, nor is that my focus. My focus here is on the job at hand. We have important work to do for the world. We know that the work we do matters. Safety is at the very forefront of that. We have always been focused on safety, quality, and integrity as our core values, and that demands a sense of excellence in how we do our work. That's where my focus is.
But you do know that you'll hear from senators today and congressmen tomorrow who will say, you are not the man to run Boeing.
Again, we understand those criticisms and those views. And Phil, my responsibility, the responsibility of the Boeing company, is to design and build and provide safe airplanes. Dennis, our job is to provide safe travel for the flying public. That's where my focus is.
Dennis, are you able to answer the question that I know you're going to get today, which is, how did Boeing let this happen? How did Boeing let a plane with a design flaw get into the air?
It's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last year, and we have a keen sense of responsibility. We're responsible for our airplanes, and any accident with one of our airplanes is unacceptable. And we've reviewed both of these accidents. We know what needs to be fixed. We own that. We have a responsibility to do that. That's exactly what we're doing. And we're confident with the updates that we're making that once the MAX returns to the skies, it'll be one of the safest airplanes ever to fly.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Dennis Muhlenberg, the CEO of Boeing, answering a few questions after making a statement, guys, before heading up to a room where he's going to be waiting for the hearing to begin. That's going to start at 10 o'clock this morning. And guys, you heard Dennis Muhlenberg talking there. A lot of questions about whether or not he should remain as CEO of this company. I can tell you from the number of years that I have known Dennis and I have interviewed him, both in terms of when he has been chairman and CEO, and now he's just the CEO, as well as when he ran Boeing Defense. That is a far different tone that we've heard from Dennis Muhlenberg than we have heard from him in the past. I think he realizes the gravity of the situation and the gravity of the moment, not only today, but what will happen tomorrow. And these are going to be tough questions, guys. And you can bet he will hear from people here on Capitol Hill who will say, you are not the man to run Boeing.
Boy, Phil, I could not agree more. I in the last, say, 5 days, Dennis Muhlenberg has been humbled, which he should be. I think that I thought his job was on the line, if not gone. I think he's totally differential. What he really said to your question is, hey, listen, I'm doing my job. If the board wants to fire me, they should fire me. But I'm doing my job. Phil, this is a man who seems to have discovered maybe I haven't approached this right. And now I'm just going to do my job, and if you don't want me, fire me. That is very, very different from the combative Muhlenberg that I thought we had, right?
Right. You are spot on, Jim. And I think you and I have heard this question from a lot of people. Why doesn't the board fire him? They got rid of Kevin McAllister, who was in charge of commercial airplanes. That move was made last week. Why didn't they get rid of Dennis Muhlenberg at the same time? Look, they are in the midst of a very complex situation trying to get this plane recertified, then get it back in service, make sure that they don't lose any of the customers who have this plane and their backlog of orders. At some point, the board is probably saying, is it wise to make a change at the top and add even more turmoil to an already tenuous situation? That's why I think, at a minimum, Dennis Muhlenberg remains in this job through the return to service, through the plane going back into service, actual service with passengers on board. Then at some point, maybe the board does say, okay, is it time for us to transition into new leadership? We don't know that for sure, but whenever I get this question from people, why don't they fire him right now? What I always come back to is you got a lot of balls in the air, and if you're the board of directors, you want to add one more by having a new CEO brought in.
Phil, we're going to hear a lot more from Muhlenberg when the hearing begins. There's a live shot of the hearing room. Before I let you go, Phil, on GM, North American margins look pretty good, although we know that the cost of the strike is going to be about $1 billion from profit.
Right. That's for the third quarter. Overall, for the year, it's about $2.9 billion. That's how much the strike is going to cost them. Guys, if not for the strike, they would have made $4 billion in North America in the third quarter. record demand for crossovers. The pickup trucks are selling at huge prices at the dealerships. I mean, I think they're close to record transaction prices, and now they're ramping up with the full-size pickup trucks as well. So, I mean, when you look at where they are right now, they are leveraging that demand in the North American market and the pricing power that they have.
Good thing, because international is not the same story.
No. Oof. Yeah, China's hurting. China's hurting.
Yeah.
You know, I keep coming back, Phil. There are people who are in Ford for yield. Every time I read a story about Ford, I get worried about that balance sheet. Don't feel that way about GM. Yep. Am I getting too cautious myself?
You're not alone in those concerns, and we've already heard from some of the credit agencies that they're worried about the financial state at Ford. Not the liquidity. They're not saying that this is a company that's going to go to junk status, but I think they were cut to one level above junk status last week. Look, we know when Jim Hackett laid out this turnaround plan last year, the easy part, and not that it's easy, but the easy part is the cost cutting. You and I know that, Jim. Now comes the tough part. How do you make sure that these investments in mobility services that are supposed to kick in starting late next year and then into 2021, how do you know that you're going to get the revenue and the growth off of that? Otherwise, if you are looking at Ford, you're saying you got the F-Series, you got some SUVs that do well, although the Explorer launch did not go well. Other than that, what have you got? Because your international business, commercial vehicles in Europe, yeah, there's some strength there. But internationally, China's a mess. South America, we know what South America is. You can't count on that for continued growth. I think those are legitimate questions, Jim.
It's tough. Very tough for them.
Phil, there's nothing you can't handle, even in that hallway that's not your own. Phil LeBeau, doing both Boeing and GM. We'll talk to you in a bit. GM's one of the big gainers this morning. Jim?
I mean, look, they're making a lot of money, and they made a lot of money during a strike. That's rather amazing. I mean, we all remember the old days. I remember there was a moment, there was a terrible strike at GM, in the 90s, and it was just like all hope is lost. So congratulations to them, but it's not a big company anymore.
We haven't yet touched on MasterCard. Pretty flat here, although dollar volume up 14. They guide revenue the high end.
I knew it was going to go. My travel trust owns it. I knew it had gone up too much because of Visa and because of PayPal, but it is a fabulous number. It has done this before. AJ Bonga is a very good executive. If it comes in, you can buy the stock. Right. Not a problem.
Timo, speaking of raising guides, Timo raises their EBITDA.
What a story. He keeps taking customer after customer after customer. He's adding so many. He never stopped, and I know that he wishes he could come on and crow, but he's got this sprint thing. It's been the one to own the whole time. You could win either way. Stock down. David, I think John Leisure, once again, is doing a good number, but I guess people are confused, trying to figure out where they are with the Attorney General in this decision. It is hard to understand where they are in the process.
Well, listen, where they are is they're going to court in early December, as you know, to fight these AGs who are still aligned against them. Now that group has a few fewer AGs as a part of it, but enough that they're going to still go to trial. The expectation is, at least he says, that they're going to be able to close this thing early next year. But there is still a question as to what they're going to face at trial from those AGs who are saying the acquisition of Sprint is going to be anti-competitive for the wireless industry. Over, of course, the objections of the Department of Justice, which has already reached a consent decree with the parties, which conceivably would create this other nationwide 5G player in the form of Charlie Ergen's Dish, which we haven't really talked very much about, exactly how they're going to get the capital they need and how much is going to be required for them to really roll out and become, over the next few years, a significant competitor in 5G. But as for T-Mo, you're right, Jim. 740,000, I think, branded postpaid additions, well over a million new customer relationships, churn at, I think, record lows. So the numbers there not looking bad. And we all know over the last 7-8 years how much competition T-Mobile has added to the wireless marketplace. But that continues to be one of the big contentions of the AGs who were fighting this, saying, yeah, look how much competition they've added. When you put Sprint together with them and you go from 4 to 3, what's going to happen then? So still a lot of questions. And by the way, questions as well for SoftBank, don't forget, the owner of Sprint, some 80% or so, and what would happen should that deal unexpectedly, because I think most people do expect it will eventually go through, unexpectedly be stopped by the judge if, in fact, he rules in favor of the AGs after the trial.
It is amazing to me that David, how do you keep adding subs the whole time that you're trying to do this deal? It is a little magical. I can't believe that this guy has basically convinced everyone that he's got the best signal, moved around the country. It appeals to millennials. Early adopters go to him. He has, David, he is a bit of magic, isn't he?
Yeah, sorry, they had branded postpaid net customer additions of 1.1 million. Churn
That's
was
huge.
1.04%.
Come on, David, that's huge.
754,000 branded postpaid phone customers. Yeah, there's different numbers here, but yeah, they're big numbers. And they have been for some time. They've been creative in terms of the offerings they give people. Of course, remember, Unlimited didn't start without them, right, Jim? Right. And the move that the other big carriers had to make to offering that. And price still continues to be an important component of this overall, and other services that they offer as well. But there's no doubt Ledger's done a great job marketing this service. Don't forget, he's not going to be that long in the CEO job. And so that's another thing people have to keep in mind, is a transition is expected to take place at the company in the not-too-distant future.
He's not going to... What do you mean? We're done with him?
What do I mean? Yeah,
I know.
He's going to... Yeah. You know that.
Yeah.
I know. What are you acting
I'm
like
just
you didn't
hoping.
know that? That's not news.
I know. I'm just hoping for a Deus Ex Machina here. I want someone...
You want him to stay?
Yeah, I want him to stay. There's very few people who really understand that because you're a CEO, you don't have to be a stiff. You can identify with people. You don't need a PR person. You can be your own PR person. You, of course, can be on a Peloton while you're texting. I mean, David, he was fun. How about that?
Yes. Not was, is.
Okay. You know, he may be the antidote to Ruth Porat. Let's say you took the Ruth Klonopin Porat. In order to be able to get it,
you're calling Ruth now Klonopin. That's
hammering her today.
Klonopin. He's 5-hour energy. I mean, he's unbelievable. He's like a whole thing of 5-hour energy. He's got your heart going and stuff. But Ruth calms you down, gives you the Klonopin. I suggest that you only do a quarter, 0.25. But Ruth could be 2.0. She's not Seroquel. Seroquel, which is the preferred drug for prisons, that's not Ruth.
I don't think we'll hear from Ruth on that, but I'm sure she's going to find out.
She's not Seroquel.
No.
I mean, I once took 1.0 Seroquel. I went to bed Friday night. I woke up Sunday.
Speaking of drug makers and drugs, Pfizer and Merck are leading the Dow here, down about 13 on the index. That's going to offset, obviously, the tone that's coming from the Grubs and the Beyonds today, Jim.
Yeah. And Beyond, I feel bad for Ethan. I mean, like Ethan, he is one of those Ethan Brown. He came on this morning on Squawk. He had a rap for everything. You could say anything to him, and he had a rap. I love that guy, but it doesn't matter. There's too much Beyond meat today. It's not Nestle's. By the way, can I just say the Tyson chicken tenders that are actually peas, they're killer.
Really?
I'm talking killer. I'm talking like the best thing I've had as a snack at the office since Spam.
Interesting. As for Grub, Jim, 2 double downgrades. Oppie goes to underperform from outperform. BAML goes to underperform from buy. The food delivery market is increasingly irrational as competitors flood the market with rewards and incentives.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically... there was a moment where he just said, listen, my industry basically has no more growth, and, it doesn't really matter who you use. There's no loyalty to Grubhub. Even though we have locked up every single major company, it doesn't seem to matter. The Jeffries piece, Grubhub food fight, this is messy. I like that. I just feel like Matt, again, I'm just doing a lot of I know I'm doing a lot of psychiatry today, and I'm not getting my United Health is not reimbursing me. But Matt's got to go see somebody. No, Matt's got to see somebody. He's in an existential crisis. He's read too much Sartre and Camus. He's got to get his head together. Matt, listen to me. I know, and Michigan State must not be doing that well in football. Matt, listen to me. You are, you need to be more in the now. You need to be present. and I've got some stuff. I've got some cognitive for him. Yeah, he needs cognitive.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Can I just, guys? Can I just make sure I understand, because I am out here and I don't have quite as much data as I usually get. So he used the word promiscuous, which obviously the first definition has to do with having a lot of relationships. It does also mean, however, being undiscriminating or unselective in your approach. What are they talking about in the use of that word, Jim? What does it actually mean? What happened?
Okay, so when we were customers at the Longshoreman, where my wife unfortunately had to make pizza this weekend because I didn't show up. We were customers of Caviar. Okay, we used Caviar, which was Square. We wanted to use Grubhub. Grubhub was the same as Square, which was the same as Uber Eats, which was the same as DoorDash. DoorDash then buys Square's Caviar. Now we use DoorDash. David, we don't give a damn who we use, and neither do the customers. I mean, whoever can get us the best price. We got 25% from Square because we argued really well. But the fact is nobody cares who comes to your door, and nobody cares who comes to your restaurant. And even though Matt has lined up a lot of big, major chains, the people from DoorDash think that Matt gave up the store to get those contracts. I happen to like Matt, which is why I want him to he's got a little Elon Musk thing going here, because his business isn't nearly as bad, but he has caused double downgrades across the board. He did not need to use the word promiscuous. All we need to say right now is there's going to be a shakeout, and we're going to be a winner. So I'm going to have to get over to his house and get the narrative straightened out.
He said too much.
Yeah, after I go to Ethan Brown, who is too earnest, and if I can find something like maybe 9 cups of U-Ban, I will go see Ruth and straighten her out.
All right, as long as you're not licentious, we just want to make sure that's not what you are, Jim.
No, he's
you're
not
just
licentious.
indiscriminate as a restaurant owner.
There's absolutely nothing there when he says promiscuous about disease. It's not about that. It's not about Glee. Gleek's never been mentioned on the show, but I just mentioned him.
Guys, Dow's gone green, and we're going to get some data on the way in a few moments. Let's get to Rick Santelli this morning. Hey, Rick.
Good morning, Carl. There's a lot of consolidation going on in interest rates, and much of it just seems to be slightly at odds with recent global data. But nonetheless, as we go into our central bank meeting, Bank of Japan, come out of ECB, we're holding these gains on global interest rates. Let's look at some 3-day charts, remembering that yesterday was a breakout day. So as you look at a 3-day chart, you look far to the left on 2 years, we're holding the breakout, consolidating. The entire curve right now is unchanged on the day. Look at a 3-day of 10 years, they extended their holding. Even Boons, they've extended their holding. Everybody is unchanged. I'm sure part of that is our central bank meetings coming up, but there's more going on than that. There seems to be this notion in the markets that the buyers that once used to come in pushing interest rates down just seem to be, at least for the moment, on strike. If you look at October 1st for 10 years, look at this chart. It's just been nothing but rates higher. And it would look the same if I was showing you charts from the UK's 10-year or the European 10-year, the Boon. But here's the fly in the ointment. Let's hook on September to that chart, and you can see that really what October did was recoup all the drops in yield that occurred in September. Carl, Jim, David, back to you.
All right, Rick, thank you very much. As you know by now, Apple TV Plus set to launch later this week. Tim Cook joining the stars of their new original series, The Morning Show. Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon, Steve Carell for a global premiere in New York City last night. Apple drops the first 3 episodes of the series on Friday. New episodes will continue to roll out every Friday after that. Reviews have been tepid so far, but we don't know how good it will get down the road.
I don't know. I saw the trailer. What do I know? I thought it was hysterical, but I did not get to the premiere, but I do thank Apple for inviting me to the premiere. I do want the new the Buds, AirPods, because I have very expensive noise canceling headphones, and these cancel noise. I have to tell you, there's no innovation under Tim Cook. He's done nothing other than change my life with every device that he has.
David, certainly you would probably agree. The innovation on the devices has outweighed their innovation so far in content.
Yeah, I mean, I've made it clear, sort of wondering why they would start with a show like this, and those reviews were not kind. But as Jim has reminded us many times, and as we've discussed, Apple is in things, can be in things for the long haul. This is way too early to judge. They are going to be spending a good amount of money and time and effort on improving and increasing the amount of content on this, and at some point it may actually become something worth discussing. I don't think you can realistically compare it in any way to Amazon, Netflix, or what is coming from Warner Media, not to mention even our own ad-supported Peacock. It doesn't have any heft, and its first show out of the box certainly not at least getting particularly good reviews.
No heft yet, David, but I mean, it's pretty early in this. I mean, the one thing we do know, it's like the credit card. Look for it here tomorrow. Yeah. Like credit card, man, I pay, oh boy, I was overdue last month. It's like kind of in there. Next thing you know, it's a fixture. I mean, Apple does a lot of things that are like, what are they doing? And then they're a fixture. Maybe this is going to be a fixture. David, is that a button down? Is that a button down?
No, it's not a button down. I don't think it's a button down. No.
How do you? You got to preserve the shirt with
just
the t-shirt.
Don't have a. What?
You have to use a t-shirt to preserve the shirt. That's what you do.
I don't wear t-shirts.
They taught me this at Goldman Sachs, David. It's one of the few things that are left over from my days at Goldman. Always wear a t-shirt and try to get a 9 multiple in your stock.
I'll agree with both of those things. When we come back, Dennis Muhlenberg on the Hill, the Senate Commerce Committee getting ready to get started to grill the Boeing CEO. We'll give you live coverage. Dow's up less than 2 points. Don't go anywhere.
The Bond Report.
It's another Tuesday afternoon, yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick and explore tropical rainforests. Fly from London Gatwick to Costa Rica with British Airways from £218 each way based on a return fare. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun with British Airways. Incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
The thing that I would say to anybody that was thinking about a job in social care is go for it. I'm Georgia. I love social care because you never know what each day will bring.
Georgia's very helpful. It's just nice to have her around.
It's emotional sometimes, highs and lows, but no 2 days are the same. I love the work, yeah. It makes me feel really good as a person. We make people smile every day.
If you want to make a difference to your life, care for someone else's, visit everydaysdifferent.com to find jobs in adult social care.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
London, switch to Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network, and Be Unlimited, because the best phones deserve the best network and our new unlimited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Max download speeds apply to unlimited data. Best network as voted by readers of trusted reviews. Terms at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
Hello? This is Dustin. I found something. Is anybody there?
We hear you, Dustin. With Sky Q, you can easily catch up on epic Netflix shows like Stranger Things and then watch award-winning Sky originals like Chernobyl. Get Sky and Netflix all in one place on Sky Q for one surprisingly low price, just £25 a month. Visit sky.com and join today. Offer ends November 14th. 18-month minimum terms. Prices may change during contract. Requires Sky Q box connected to broadband. Set up from £20. Further terms apply.
Hey, you. We didn't make Nature Valley Crunchy bars so you could just sit and scoff them in front of the TV. Not when you could be enjoying them outdoors. Up here! Race it to the top! With 100% whole grain oats and delicious honey. Nature Valley Crunchy. Get out more.
We've seen Dennis Muhlenberg once already this morning. In a few moments, he'll appear in front of the Senate Commerce Committee, talk about the 737 MAX jet and the future of Boeing and his own tenure. For the time being, Dow's up 20 points. We're back in a moment.
Orlando isn't just the theme park capital of the world.
How can I help you?
Just a latte, please.
Grande. Guatemalan bean.
Oh.
Hazelnut syrup.
Wow.
Whipped cream.
All right.
That's $5.25, please.
Oh.
You can't always control what you spend, but you can save as you spend with Save the Change. When you use your Lloyds Bank debit card, we'll round up the amount to the next pound and transfer the difference to your nominated Lloyds Bank savings account. Feel in control every day with our mobile banking app. Lloyds Bank, by your side. T's and C's apply.
Hey NFL fans, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you have unlimited access to every team and every game in the league. Listen live as it happens or on demand. Anytime, anywhere. All season long. Search NFL today.
Swinging a long drive, left field. He's got one now. Kurt Suzuki gives the Nationals the lead.
The excitement of the Fall Classic is here, and you can hear every call of the 2019 World Series on TuneIn Premium. The action continues tonight with Game 6 between the NL champion Washington Nationals and American League champion Houston Astros. Listen live at 8 Eastern as two of Major League Baseball's most storied franchises look to bring home the World Series title. The 2019 World Series is on TuneIn Premium.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The roar of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut
the
it.
Sideline, the man fleet for three.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now. Hear it live on TuneIn.
Pump fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on the
Search
right.
NBA today to start listening.
Next time you look up at the stars, think about this.
Inside you are the remains of a stellar explosion. You are made of stardust. And without the stars, there wouldn't be us.
I'm Guy Raj, the wonders of the universe and the people who still look up every night. Next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. You can subscribe to the TED Radio Hour on TuneIn.
Get social with TuneIn. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest and greatest audio on the app. Explore exclusive content. Learn about hot new podcasts and get alerted when the big game, well, it's about to begin. Add TuneIn to your feed and be in the know when it matters most.
Jim, what's on Mad tonight?
One of my favorite companies, Zebra Technologies. They are the barcode company, and believe it or not, when you talk about automation in this world and digitization, they've got maybe the best. Anders Gustafsson is a genius and underrated, and the stock keeps going higher.
We didn't really talk Brexit. Looks like we'll get an election now.
I know.
Or the Fed tomorrow.
I know. Geez, and I think that Steve Leisman covered it very well today, saying we all expect something in October. Brexit is just a black hole. Although some companies are doing better over in Europe. And David, good to see you. Maybe throw a little time on there now and then.
Yes, thank you. No undershirt from me, but thanks for showing yours.
Always good to see you, David. Always good to see you.
Always. David, we'll see you a bit later on. A busy day as LA's still waking up. When we come back, a Boeing CEO on Capitol Hill facing questions from the Senate Commerce Committee. Don't go anywhere.
Stuck in traffic during the big game? With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to your favorite NFL team on the go. No TV required. Even during rush hour, you won't miss a single touchdown. Listen to the NFL on TuneIn Premium today.
To get creative. With more shapes, stocks, and finishes from Vistaprint, you can create a business card as unique as you. Now introducing free shipping on all business cards. I'm feeling good. Any style, just like it should. Any quantity. I'm feeling good. Get free shipping on all business cards with promo code TVNOW. Own the now with Vistaprint.
For drug-free sinus and allergy relief, experience Navage.
This time of year, I get so stuffed up, but Navage flushes my sinuses so I can breathe again.
Navage uses powered suction to flush out allergens, germs, mucus, and dirt.
My doctor recommends Navage to breathe better through my nose, and it works. Congestion's gone, and I feel great.
And Navage is so much easier than a neti pot.
Trusted by happy noses everywhere, Navage is nature's decongestant. Online and at these fine retailers.
We're the Nigerian brothers. John's been a professional trader for over 37 years, and Pete is one of the country's top 100 traders. On TV, we report on how we follow the smart money from Wall Street's elite, who have the massive resources to get market information before the rest of us. Their unusual option activity tells us what they're starting to trade. Our strategy uncovers why they're trading it and how to follow along for the biggest return. It works on stocks and options. It's the #1 way we choose our trades. Many of you ask, how can you do it too? So we laid out our strategy in our newest book, revealing things we've never revealed. And today we're giving some copies away for free. All you have to do is cover shipping.
Prefer video learning? Get John and Pete's new DVD for free too. Call 1-800-540-7070 or go to followthesmartmoney.com to get your free book and DVD. Call 1-800-540-7070 or go to followthesmartmoney.com now.
Started with working with Policy Genius to figure out what plan would work for me and if it was true that I was paying too much. I saved about 20%. Not only did I save 20%, but I got extra coverage. It just feels like I could take a deep breath and sleep well at night.
Right before this happened, I quit a full-time job.
And I cashed out my 401k. I put this together on my own.
I'm the person who made it.
Shark Tank, tonight starting at 7 Eastern. CNBC, get yours.
You are looking at a picture of Capitol Hill, where in a few moments, the CEO of Boeing, Dennis Muhlenberg, will testify before the Senate Commerce Committee, answering questions about the 737 MAX. When that begins, of course, we will take you there live. In the meantime, good Tuesday morning. Welcome back to Squawk on the Street. I'm Carl Quintanilla with Leslie Picker, who's in for Sarah Eisen. We're live at Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. David Faber's in California today for Warner Media Day. A lot of coverage coming from David later on. Markets are pretty flat here. A lot of mixed bag of earnings today, including some blow-ups. And we're getting some data as well. For that, we'll go to Rick Santelli at the CMG. Rick?
Thanks, Carl. We're looking for our read on October consumer confidence from the Conference Board, expecting 128. We end up with 125.9. Now, that might look like a disappointment based on expectations, but it's sequentially higher it was sequentially higher until we just got a revision. 26.3 is the new previous month versus 125.1, so we're a bit down. How does that stack up? Well, it's the highest number really since it's the lowest number going back to March now. Going back to March, it would have been just till last month. Let's go through the internals, shall we? The present situation actually ramped up nicely from 169 to 172.3. And if you look at the expectations of what may lie ahead, it backtracked just a bit from 95.8 to 94.9. Now, for September pending home sales, let's aim east. Diana Olick.
Rick, pending home sales rose 1.5% in September month to month and were 3.9% higher annually. That according to the National Association of Realtors. And that's a beat. Street was expecting a little lower. Now, this index measures signed contracts to buy existing homes, so people out shopping in September. Realtors thank low mortgage rates for the gain. The average on the 30-year fix fell below 4% in June and has stayed between 3.5% and 4% since then. Rates did move to the higher end of that range in September, which may be behind a split in sales by region. Pending sales in the Northeast and the West, where prices are highest, they fell month to month. But sales in the South and Midwest, where prices are less, rose. A shortage of homes for sale continues to be the biggest barrier to stronger sales. Closed sales in September, which were contracts from July and August, they fell unexpectedly, and realtors blamed low supply and high prices for that. Carl?
All right, Diana, thank you. And thank you, Rick. Let's get to Phil LeBeau, who a few moments ago had a chance to ask Dennis Muhlenberg some questions ahead of today's hearing. Phil?
Hey, Carl, this hearing is about to start, but as you mentioned a few minutes ago, we had a chance to talk with Dennis Muhlenberg as he arrived here in Capitol Hill, and I asked him if this is too little too late.
On this day, our deepest sympathies go with these families, and we've thought long and hard about both of the accidents that have occurred. We've learned a lot as a company. We're humbled. It has only amplified our focus on safety going forward. And as I said, we're never going to forget.
But can you guarantee this would never happen again once this plane gets recertified?
The Phil, we're going to commit to doing everything we can to ensure accidents like this never happen again. We have made updates to the MAX where we believe accidents like this will not happen again. And we're never going to stop focusing on safety and continuously improving.
Have there been discussions with the board that maybe once this is certified and the plane returns to service, it's time for you to transition out of the CEO job?
Phil, those aren't discussions that I'm involved in, nor is that my focus. My focus here is on the job at hand. We have important work to do for the world. We know that the work we do matters. Safety is at the very forefront of that. We have always been focused on safety, quality, and integrity as our core values, and that demands a sense of excellence in how we do our work. That's where my focus is.
But you do know that you'll hear from senators today and congressmen tomorrow who will say, you are not the man to run Boeing.
Again, we understand those criticisms and those views. And Phil, my responsibility, the responsibility of the Boeing company is to design and build, provide safe airplanes. Yes. Our job is to provide safe travel for the flying public. That's where my focus is.
Boeing CEO Dennis Muhlenberg here on Capitol Hill just a few minutes ago. He is now in the Senate hearing room. We expect this hearing to begin momentarily. And Carl, you can bet this will be a rough couple of hours for Dennis Muhlenberg. There will be a lot of senators not only asking about the MAX and its development, but who will come out and likely say, you should not be running this company. And how do we have guarantees that this will never happen again and that Boeing has truly learned from what's gone wrong here?
Phil, in those conversations that you had with Muhlenberg a little while ago, when you asked him whether he's having conversations with the board over the CEO job, he said that these aren't discussions I'm involved in. How important is his performance today in order to keep his job as CEO?
I think it's important. I don't think it'll be the deciding factor, Leslie. I think that, look, if he has a terrible performance, and we do sometimes see that when the CEOs of companies come here to Capitol Hill. Look at the first time Mary Barra came here for the GM ignition switch. I mean, that was a disaster. So when that happens, that does not help the CEO who's in the hot seat. And Dennis Muhlenberg is clearly in the hot seat. So do I expect that at the end of the next couple of days, if it's really bad, that they would pull the trigger and say, you're not CEO anymore? I don't think so. But clearly, they want to get through this certification. That's the main focus for the company. To remove the CEO right now would just add more turmoil.
Phil, it sounds like you think the important questions are going to focus more on the process than on Muhlenberg's tenure.
Yes, the process and the culture at Boeing. Look, yesterday we talked to Representative Peter DeFazio, and he'll be leading the hearing tomorrow over on the Congress side, the representative side, and he basically said, look, I think it goes all the way to the top. I think the pressure to get this plane done and get cut costs, that goes all the way to the top. And he wasn't saying, vice president level. He was saying right up all the way up to Dennis Muhlenberg. So that will be a focus as well.
All right, Phil, we'll be talking to you all morning long, obviously. Our Phil LeBeau covering the hearing in D.C. Joining us in the meantime is former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. Mr. Secretary, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
What's important to you out of this hearing?
Well, look, this is a tough hearing, but this is a hearing that needs to happen because these members of Congress, these senators today and the House members tomorrow represent the people. And the people want to know when they board a plane, is it the safest plane that is being manufactured by Boeing? And that's the ultimate question. Can he answer the question? Are you manufacturing the safest planes that are in the air? These people represent the flying public, and this is the flying public's first opportunity to go face to face with the number one guy at Boeing.
Did the relationship between the manufacturer and regulators, has it gone askew? Does there need to be some rebalance? And who bears responsibility for innovations and fixes?
You know, while we were at DOT for 4.5 years, we felt that the people at FAA were highly professional. They're career people. They're not political people. There's maybe a handful of political people at the FAA. I really never felt that there was any kind of opportunity for people to have any kind of, relationships that were not totally professional. The FAA has had a good reputation, and they're a part of the evaluation the fix for the MAX, and I've always had a very high regard for the professional people at FAA.
Much has been made, Secretary, about what the FAA's role was here and whether Boeing had too much clout when it came to approving these systems and making them eligible for flying. Do you think there needs to be a restructuring of the balance of power between the FAA and companies like Boeing in which it regulates?
I do think that part of the hearing today will get into that matter. And perhaps there does need to be rethinking on the kind of relationship the FAA has with Boeing, excuse me, and the kind of responsibility that the FAA has for certifying these planes. I think it's a good point, and I think you're going to hear that from the senators and the House members tomorrow as they get into the kind of methods that are used for certification of these planes. And I think it's a good issue to look at. I really do.
And you've previously served in the House of Representatives for the 18th District of Illinois. How well versed can we expect the congressmen, the lawmakers, to be over the next few days in kind of the more intricate, complicated issues related to software processes as it relates to the safety of these aircraft?
Well, I do think that when you look at the members of the committee, particularly the Transportation Committee in the House, you have some people. The ranking member of the committee is a pilot. Peter DeFazio is from Oregon, and he's right next to the state where Boeing is located. So I think over the long period of time, and Peter's been in Congress, the chairman's been in Congress for 30 years. He's studied these issues. Do they know in depth all of the technical aspects of it? Of course not. But they know enough to ask the right questions, and they know enough about the process of certification to do what you've been suggesting, and that's to look at this process and see if it needs to be changed.
Secretary, what do you think is the right tone that Muhlenberg should strike today? Is it this kind of conciliatory tone that we've seen from his prepared remarks? Does he need to be, this voice of confidence to get these planes back up in the air and reassure members of the public that they're safe to fly? I mean, what would you like to see from him in terms of his tone today?
I think his tone of humility is a good tone. I also think his tone of these planes are not going to go back in the air until the idea that they're 100% safe. I think he has to guarantee that to the members of the Senate and the members of the House tomorrow. I really do. I think the flying public wants assurance when they get on a plane it's 100% safe. So I think his humility is very good. I think his recognition that some things perhaps were not done correctly is very good. I think he's setting the right tone based on what I've read. Now, obviously, I'll have a chance to actually watch him, but I think the words that he's using are words that will hopefully give assurance to the members of Congress that these planes are not going to be in the air until they're 100% safe.
Yeah, you keep using the words 100% safe like that's some special thing. That sort of should be the standard for all planes that are in the air, as we watch the chairman, Roger Wicker, bring the hearing to order. I do wonder, though, once we get closer to return to service, how you think the company's going to try to market this, how the carriers are going to try to market this, because you can bet that some flyers are going to ask at the gate, what plane are we on?
Well, I do think that you're going to have to see, as the FAA administrator has already said, he's going to be doing some testing on these planes, and he's going to make sure that they're 100% safe. I think that's a good signal. I think you have to see some of the top executives of Boeing getting on these planes and assuring people that they're safe, and I think that sends a good message, and certainly that's the message they have to send.
Secretary, what do you think Airbus is looking for from today's hearing? Well,
I don't know. I haven't really looked at that much. Obviously, Airbus is is a big competitor, and so I haven't really thought that much about Airbus. I've been really more focused, as you have, on Boeing and finding the fix and making sure that it's the right fix. And again, back to my point, 100% safe assurance to the flying public. I think that's what members of Congress are looking for.
What do you make of this ongoing dispute, Mr. Secretary, between the manufacturer and the pilots? ALPA continues to suggest that a lot of this was not because of any kind of pilot training, and historically that had been Boeing's defense in the past. Is that going to get resolved one way or another?
Of course it will be. I think when the final report comes out and the final recommendations, and Boeing finally steps up and says, here's what happened, here's what we fixed, here's what went wrong, I think that's really what has to happen. So again, that the pilots, the flying public, and everyone knows what really went wrong. And they're going to have to disclose that before people are going to really feel safe on these planes, and take full responsibility for what happened.
We'll learn a lot more in a few moments, Mr. Secretary. Ray LaHood, I appreciate your time on an important story for anyone who's invested in Boeing. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, for a closer look at the airline industry expectations, let's bring in former Continental Airlines CEO and chairman and CNBC contributor, Gordon Bethune. Gordon, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Leslie. Thanks.
So CNBC.com had a story out today that quoted Representative Peter DeFazio, who is the chair of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. He said this all starts on Wall Street, indicating that there were investor pressures that led Boeing to make some of the decisions it made and become more aggressive in getting that 737 MAX up in the air as quickly as possible to compete with Airbus. What do you make of that?
Well, there's always financial pressure, but I don't believe it changes behavior necessarily. There is a cognizance that you need to be profitable, but I'm 100% sure that this is not profit-driven decision-making at Boeing.
And yet, Boeing is still up about 6% this year. I mean, that's lagging the market, but clearly investors do believe that this plane will fly again eventually. Do you believe that to be the case?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's ready to go now, but I understand out of a preponderance of caution, they're going through this process. The previous guest mentioned that it is a process and a good one, but at the same time, it's a good airplane. It's been a good airplane for many, many years, and it'll be many years in the future as well.
How important is it to, obviously today will be the focus on U.S. lawmakers. How important is it also to get the buy-in from global regulators as well on these planes? I know historically the FAA has been kind of the singular regulator to approve the safety conditions of U.S. manufactured planes, but now it seems like this has become more of a global focus for regulators outside of the U.S.
Well, I think that is some political actions being taken, not just necessarily safety. Don't forget, this same company, Boeing, put people on the moon and brought them back, and has a 100-year safety record that's unprecedented in the world. So, I mean, U.S. aviation is a benchmark. It has been. You can see some erosion in it every time there is a crack, but at the same time, I wouldn't discount Boeing for anything at all.
Hey, Gordon, we had Gary Kelly of Southwest on with us last week. He kind of took us by surprise when he said that the board would look at next year whether or not to diversify away from not just the 737, but from Boeing planes in general. I wonder, is that posturing, or could that actually happen? How big of a deal would that be for the workhorse of the industry?
Well, it would break a 100-year, 50-year mold that's made them successful. I don't blame Gary for talking, in frustration that he's not wedded to the Boeing company. That's be sure they don't take him for granted, but it would be a very, very, very expensive move if they did that.
Just in sort of retraining pilots and mechanics, or folding in the complexity that comes from multiple aircraft type?
And that's been their blue chip that they would not waive their standards, same type rating, same airplane, same inventory, same training. That's how they get scale economy, which makes them a discount carrier and a good one and a fierce competitor. So you'd be giving up a whole lot if you switched off of what you have today.
A lot of lawmakers are blaming culture, a crisis of culture at Boeing for being partially responsible for some of the lapses as it pertains to the software bugs that led to these two planes to crash. How difficult is it for Boeing or anyone else in the industry to really change and shift a culture to make sure that there are more of these checks and balances that would prevent some of these lapses in the future?
Well, you know, I was a proud employee of Boeing for a lot of years, and they have one of the strongest, highest rated cultures of safety and human cognizance, awareness of how you're feeling. Boeing has got one thing, and that's to be safe, and that's primary. And now also their idea is no single point of failure, which they may have deviated from that concept that caused this issue. I'm guessing, so I don't want to say that for sure. But Boeing believes that the pilot should fly the airplane, should be able to disconnect any automated feature, disconnect whatever goes wrong, and still fly the airplane successfully. And that's what didn't happen in these two instances.
Yeah, you mentioned that engineering, Gordon, which was the result of a rethinking of the plane in general and the placement of the engines and the way the plane was balanced. I wonder if you think because of that, we've sort of reached a plateau in the ways in which an airplane can be improved, at least from an efficiency standpoint.
Well, Carl, not a bad point. I don't want to make that point because I think they needed to address the issue. There was an incident where the Ford CG, I guess, caused a problem, which precipitated the MCAS system. But at the same time, Boeing continuously involves and improves airplanes. Even airplanes that were made 10 years ago receive improvements today as they're made aware of where they can make a positive influence. So I don't see the mouse chasing its tail here. I think they're trying to make as safe an airplane as they know how to do it, and that it's going to be a good airplane, Carl. It's a good airplane today.
Gordon, put on your marketing hat for us just for a moment.
Yes, sir.
If you're a carrier that uses the MAX, we get back to service. You got it once again in rotation. How overt are you in publicizing that it is in a cycle? Do you tell consumers out flat? Do you try to keep that quiet and answer only if they ask?
You know, Carl, there's how many millions of people fly every day, so there's not enough Airbus airplanes to carry them all, so we're going to have to fly Boeing. I would certainly, from a marketing perspective, put myself on the airplane. I'd have all my senior officers on the airplanes and my employees. And I would bet you if you went to Boeing today and asked who wants to go fly on the MAX in the morning, you'd get 100% participation. So I think it's important to show self-confidence that they've got it fixed. I believe they have it fixed, and I would fly any day. I would fly it tonight.
One of the assurances that Muhlenberg will need to make to lawmakers is that the testing that they've been doing, the simulations that they've been doing have been robust enough that would ensure that they have fixed the problem. How can you do that in terms of testing? Are there any lessons learned in terms of how they tested this aircraft previously?
Well, I think on all airplanes.
Before you answer, Gordon, I think we are going to get Muhlenberg's opening statement. There's the chairman, Roger Wicker of Mississippi. Let's get to Dennis Muhlenberg.
Ranking Member Cantwell, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. And we share your commitment to aviation safety. Before we start today, I'd like to speak directly to the families of the victims who are here with us. On behalf of myself and the Boeing Company, we are sorry, deeply and truly sorry. As a husband and father myself, I'm heartbroken by your losses. I think about you and your loved ones every day, and I know our entire Boeing team does as well. I know that probably doesn't offer much comfort and healing at this point, but I want you to know that we carry those memories with us every day. And every day, that drives us to improve the safety of our airplanes and our industry. And that will never stop. I'm grateful and humbled to be here today and to be able to say these words to the families directly. And I want to convey our absolute commitment to safety, our commitment to learning, our commitment to rebuilding the public's confidence in what we do, and to preventing accidents from like this from ever happening again. We will never forget, and that is our commitment going forward. Mr. Chairman, I know this committee has many questions about the MAX. We'll do our best today to answer all of those questions. And while one of the accidents is still under investigation, we know both accidents involved the repeated activation of a flight control system called MCAS, which responded to erroneous signals from a sensor that measures the airplane's angle of attack. Based on that, we've enhanced MCAS in 3 ways. First, it will now compare information from both sensors instead of one before activating. Second, MCAS will only activate a single time. And third, MCAS will never provide more input than a pilot can counteract using the control column alone. Pilots will also continue to have the ability to override MCAS at any time. We've brought the best of Boeing to this effort. We've spent over 100,000 engineering and test hours. We've flown more than 800 test flights. We've conducted simulator sessions with 545 participants from 99 customers and 41 global regulators. I've flown on a couple of flights myself. This has taken longer than expected, but we're committed to getting it right. During this process, we've worked closely with the FAA and other regulators. We provided them documentation, had them fly the simulators, answered their questions, and regulators around the world should rigorously scrutinize the MAX and only approve its return to flight when they are completely satisfied with its safety. The public deserves nothing less. Mr. Chairman, today and every day, over 5 million people will board a Boeing airplane and fly safely to their destination. Decades of cooperation and innovation by industry and regulators and the rigorous oversight of this committee have reduced accidents by more than 95% over the last 20 years. But no number, other than 0 accidents, is ever acceptable. We can and must do better. We've been challenged and changed by these accidents. We've made mistakes, and we got some things wrong. We're improving, and we're learning, and we're continuing to learn. We established a permanent aerospace safety committee of our board. We've stood up a new safety organization. We've strengthened our engineering organization so that all engineers now report up through Boeing's chief engineer. We're also helping to rebuild the communities and families impacted by these accidents. We've pledged $100 million to this effort and have hired renowned experts in this area to ensure families can access these funds as quickly as possible. No amount of money can bring back what was lost, but we can at least help the families meet their financial needs. Mr. Chairman, I started at Boeing more than 30 years ago as a summer intern in Seattle. I was a junior at Iowa State University studying engineering, having grown up on a family farm in Iowa. I was awestruck to work at the company that brought the jet age to the world and helped land a person on the moon. Today, I'm still inspired by what Boeing does and by the remarkable men and women who are committed to its outstanding legacy. But these heartbreaking accidents and the memories of the 346 lives lost are now part of that legacy. It is our solemn duty to learn from them, and we will. Recently, there's been much criticism of Boeing and our culture. We understand and deserve this scrutiny. But I know the people of Boeing. They are more than 150,000 of the most dedicated, honest, hardworking men and women in the world. And their commitment to safety, quality, and integrity is unparalleled and resolute. We will stay true to those values because we know our work demands the utmost excellence. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mullenberg. During my opening statement, mentioned an instant message conversation and then a series of emails. The instant message conversation was between the 737 MAX chief technical pilot and a colleague. And it expresses concerns about the operation of the MCAS. Boeing knew about this instant message for months, but failed to share it with the FAA until recently. With regard to the emails, again, Mr. Faulkner, the former MAX chief technical pilot, calls for removing any mention of the MCAS flight control system from the flight crew operating manual. He talks about Jedi mind tricking of regulators with at least one person who works for the FAA. So with regard to the instant message conversation, when were you made aware of the existence of the November 2016 messages?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, so I recall I was made aware of that message earlier this year. It was discovered as part of a document gathering process in response to a government investigation.
So it was after the crashes. You were made aware of it this year.
Sir, as I recall, I believe it was prior to the second crash earlier this year.
Was it your decision to wait months before disclosing this to the FAA?
Mr. Chairman, at that point it had been identified as a document in response to an ongoing investigation, and I relied on our counsel to provide that to the appropriate authorities.
Okay, well, what did the counsel tell you? Did he say, I'm going to supply it to the Justice Department, or did he say, I'm going to get it to appropriate authorities?
And Mr. Chairman, I don't recall having a specific conversation about which authorities. Just, again, as part of this investigative process, our intent to cooperate fully with the request and to provide that to the appropriate authorities. And I think over this time period this year, we provided on the order of 500,000 pages of documents in support of various requests.
Well, do you agree that this should have been provided to the FAA in retrospect?
Yeah. Senator, as I became familiar with the details of the document over the last few weeks, as I expressed our disappointment and concern with how this came to the FAA, I think you heard the same from Administrator Dixon. I called him and apologized for how this had come through the process. Again, I was involved in the document production process, but it counted on our team to make sure all the right authorities were notified.
Okay, so we should look to the team then. Can you assure the committee that Boeing has now turned over all such safety-related communications to the FAA related to the 737 MAX?
Senator, our team continues to cooperate with all requests for documentation. I'm sure that additional documents will be provided over time as they're discovered, as would be normal to the process. But we will cooperate fully with the requests.
It seems to me that a request shouldn't have to have been made with regard to that IM conversation, sir. Let me ask you, when did you become aware of the emails that I referred to in the second part of my question about Jedi mind-tricking regulators?
Senator, again, just recently I've been informed of the details of those emails and the instant message that
you give us an idea of how recently?
Over the last couple of weeks when it became public news.
Okay, and you did not know about it until then?
Sir, I don't recall being briefed on the details of those documents anytime prior to that.
Can you see that this raises much concern about the level of coziness between Boeing personnel and FAA regulators?
And Mr. Chairman, I understand the concern there, again, we're doing our best to lean forward and provide information as part of this process. I can tell you that the comments, the values, the approaches that are described in those emails are counter to our values. That in no way would meet any expectation I would have for our team or our employees. So I understand the concern, share the concern, and just want to convey it's not consistent with our values as a company at all.
And this series of emails has only in the last few weeks come to your attention. Is that right, sir?
As Senator, as I said, I was aware of the documents that were being produced as part of an investigation. That's what I recall from earlier this year. I don't recall getting briefed on details of these documents. Those details are things that I learned of over the last few weeks.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you could help, I have a lot to go through, so we're going to try to move quickly through it. Was Boeing aware of the defects in the MCAS system, which it failed to disclose to the FAA at the time the aircraft was in development and certification?
Senator, as you know, the MCAS development occurred over a lengthy time period, about a 6-year development program of the MAX. We have learned from both accidents, and we've identified changes that need to be made to MCAS. We did, during the development process, follow our certification standards and long-standing industry standards behind the MCAS design. But clearly, we've learned, and there are things we need to improve on MCAS.
Are you saying?
Answer the question, Mr. Mullenberg.
Senator, could I ask you to...
Was Boeing aware of defects in the MCAS system, which it failed to disclose to the FAA at the time the aircraft was in development and certification?
Senator, I just have to question I'll say the premise of the question. So we as part of our development process, we do identify hazards and failure modes.
And they were disclosed?
That was part of the failure mode analysis that we shared as part of the certification process during that time period.
So you think everything that you were aware of was disclosed to the FAA as it relates to defects in the MCAS system?
Well, Senator, as we get to defects, things we need to fix, we've identified 3 areas that we talked about needing to address. One was the single sensor feed. That was a piece of the architecture that was shared with the FAA. The fact that the system would operate more than once during a flight, that was also part of the design description. And the control authority of the system at various parts of the flight.
Do you know what Mr. Faulkner is referring to when he says unknowingly lied to the FAA or Jedi mind tricking?
Senator, I'm not sure what he meant by that. We haven't been able to talk to him. He doesn't work for Boeing anymore. We've been trying to contact him.
Here's my concern, that if you don't know what he meant, then you also don't know what wasn't disclosed. And so we don't know if there are things in the MCAS system that were defects that he or someone else knew about that weren't disclosed. So I hear what you're saying, that there's a lot to discover in a process, but I'd like to go over some of the very specifics about what was tested. And did Boeing test the consequences of the MCAS reliance on a single AOA sensor? Did it test that?
Yeah. Senator, we tested a broad array of different aspects of the MCAS system, a set of failure modes. We did thorough flight testing. John, if you want to comment on the details there.
Yeah, Senator, the 737NG is one of the safest airplanes that's flown service.
We're trying to understand what got tested. So did you test the reliability of the AOA sensors in general? Did you test the reliability on a single sensor? Did you consult with the pilots on the lack of guidance on MCAS and the flight manuals? Did you test the AOA sensor's degree alert to ensure reliability? Did you test the human factor response? These are all things from the Lion Air report, and my guess is you didn't test those, and that's at the heart of this. But if you did, and you have data on that, and it was provided to the FAA, that's what we want to see.
Senator, we did test the MCAS uncommanded inputs to the stabilizer system due to whatever causes was driving it, not specifically due to an AOA sensor. We assessed that hazard level. We talked with our pilots.
Which now do you think is wrong?
In hindsight, Senator, yes.
Thank you, because I agree.
Yeah.
Senator, if I could just add a point to that, because as John pointed out, we relied on these longstanding industry standards as part of our evaluation of response time. behind MCAS, and that is one of the areas that
here's the thing
we found shortfall.
Here's the thing I'm very confused about, which is just this larger issue. And look, we want to get this right because we do want to go forward, and we know there is going to be automation in many aspects of our lives. But this robust testing that must occur and third-party validation, I just don't understand how you have sensors on the outside of a plane, and you're going to let that send a command to the inside of the plane that basically says trim the plane 2.5 degrees, and then all of a sudden you're going to be yelled at from the cockpit from somebody saying pull up, and then the same time you're being forced down in your nose and you have seconds to respond because you're in takeoff. That doesn't seem like a lot of robust testing was done to me, because if it was, then the Lion Air incident wouldn't have happened. Okay, so I see my time. I have a few seconds left. I want to just bring up a couple. Look, I think this whole issue of airspeed is a major issue writ large for all of us to get right, the sector. Those crashes about automation, even the Air France crash is related to a faulty pitot tube. I don't know how much we should be trusting things on the outside of the plane to give commands to the inside of the plane when they can be damaged. So, but I do want to know that you are improving the safety culture. This issue of both reporting, people not being able to talk to FAA, oversight people, and this issue of some of the machinist Boeing quality inspectors their work being taken over. I want to understand that a safety culture is going to exist.
Senator, if anything I can leave with you today, I want to reinforce the culture of safety at Boeing. And we know we can improve. You know, we encourage our employees to speak up when there are issues, and some of those have been public recently. We respect and accept those inputs. We take action following on those. We have recently made a number of improvements that includes restructuring our safety review boards, elevating them to increase transparency and focus on safety. We've moved all 50,000 Boeing engineers to now report directly to our chief engineer, separating them from the business.
I'm going to ask you to come back on the SPIA and Boeing quality inspectors, two different issues with a written response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I went over my time.
Thank you. And now I have the duty of telling the distinguished whip that he's limited to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Muhlenberg, it's my understanding that the MCAS has been substantially redesigned to include several redundancies that will better prevent erroneous activation. Could you speak to why some of the changes being made in the reconfiguration of the MCAS were not considered in the initial development of the system?
Yes, Senator, I think you raise a very important point. And as John began to allude to earlier, the original concept for the MCAS design was an extension of what we call the speed trim system on the 737NG, the previous version of the 737. That is a single sensor system that's been proven safe in flight, more than 200 million flight hours. So one of our safety principles is to minimize change from model to model. That is a good standard safety process. That was the concept behind the original MCAS design. Now, what we've learned from both accidents is that we made some mistakes. There are some things we can improve. One of them is this idea of going to a dual sensor feed instead of single, as well as limiting MCAS to a single action or activation during a flight. Those are improvements that we've identified. We take responsibility for that. We feel responsible for our airplanes, and we know that there are some fixes that we need to make. We own that, and we are implementing those fixes going forward.
As we discuss possible improvements to the certification of aircraft, it would be helpful for you to explain how safety is supposed to be integrated into the certification process from the initial conception of the aircraft all the way to flying at 30,000 feet, filled with passengers. Since these crashes, we've heard concerns about whether Boeing's relationship with the FAA is too cozy. And we want a certification process that is efficient and that promotes U.S. competitiveness, but one that always prioritizes safety. So what would you say to address the concerns that have been raised about regulatory capture?
Senator, I agree with the focus in that area. I would say that over the last couple of decades, the improvements that have been made in aviation safety are because of strong government oversight. That includes the work of this committee. It includes the oversight of the FAA. The delegated authority process, as it's structured, we do think has contributed to safety of the industry. I mentioned in my comments that there's about a 95% improvement in safety over the last 2 decades. Some of that, I believe, is associated with the delegated authority. But we have to get the balance right. And I think it's very important that we have strong government oversight, strong FAA oversight, but we also tap the technical depth that our industry teams can bring to the table. That's the concept. But if we need to rebalance it, I fully support evaluating that concept, looking at the details, and making sure we've got the balance.
Could you briefly explain, very briefly if you could, how Boeing and the FAA work together to certify aircraft?
Yeah, Senator, I could, but I think Mr. Hamilton here is a deeper expert on that. If I could ask him to take that question.
Certainly. Senator, the FAA is actually in control of the certification process the whole time. So let me just kind of walk you through the process very quickly. It starts off by identifying the requirements to certify the airplane. That is the sole authority of the FAA. It establishes the certification basis of the airplane. The second step is identifying the methods of compliance to those requirements. So this is how you're going to show that your airplane design actually meets those requirements. Again, the FAA is the sole authority on that. That's their action. The third step is doing the testing, the analysis, and the documentation that demonstrates the airplane meets those requirements. And that is done by Boeing in our case, or the applicant. And then there's a review of those documents to validate that they actually met the requirements. And that can be done by the FAA or the ODA, who acts as a designee of the FAA, or it can be a combination. And finally, there's oversight. The FAA does oversight of the actual unit members. They do oversight of the ODA, and are you following the processes? They do oversight of, did you find compliance as they expected with the methods of compliance? And then they do systemic oversight of the entire system.
Okay. Mr. Mullenberg, how are you working to ensure, coming back to this issue of safety, that employees who raise concerns, even if they inhibit your ability to get a product to the market quickly, are taken seriously, and that importantly, those concerns are raised to the top and not brushed aside?
Yes, Senator, in my role as the CEO of this company, I take that responsibility very seriously. We have a number of ethics hotline avenues that our employees can use. When it comes to delegated authority in particular, we also have additional survey tools that we deploy, and we openly share that data with the FAA and make improvements. That said, again, we know we can improve. And one of the areas that I've taken recent action on is to restructure our safety organization. So we have now created a new safety organization. Vice President Beth Pastor, who reports to my chief engineer, who reports directly to me. That safety organization has responsibility for all safety-related accident investigations, our ODA process, and also responding to any employee concerns.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Senator Cantwell. I also want to give my sincere thanks to the people who are here, who lost their loved ones in these two crashes. I think you are here not only for them, and it must be hard to hear all of these technical issues when you think of your brother or sister or father or mother or son or daughter. But I want you to know that we want to get to the bottom of this, and we want to change this. So I guess I'd start with where Senator Thune was going with the FAA and Boeing and this relationship. A recent Inspector General report found that only 4% of airline manufacturers' employees responsible for conducting the certification were certified by the FAA that they conducted oversight. The same report found that one manufacturer approved about 95% of certifications for their own aircraft. What can you tell us about the percentage of certifications that Boeing conducts on its own aircraft?
Senator, I can't answer that number off the top of my head. I don't know, John, if you have a...
No, I'd have to follow up with you.
Okay.
Senator.
How many Boeing engineers both design systems for the company and then certify those same systems for the FAA? I'm just trying to get at a safety check from the outside.
So we have approximately 1,000 engineering unit members that work not just in systems.
But what percentage of them then certify the safety as opposed to having the FAA certify the safety?
Those are roughly 1,000 unit members that are acting on behalf of the FAA to find compliance. But that's beyond just systems. This includes structures and propulsion, so it's across the whole airplane.
Senator, just to clarify, we have about 50,000 engineers at Boeing. About 1,000 of them are what we call operate in this area that John's referring to, unit members. So these are members who have the authority and the training.
Okay, why don't we'll follow up. And I am trying to get at when the FAA steps in and when you certify it yourself, and we'll get that later. 2 months after Mr. Faulkner sent these messages expressing safety concerns, he asked the FAA to remove mention of the MCAS automated flight control feature from the 737 MAX pilot's flight manual and training course, a change that the FAA approved in 2017. Notably, Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee report on the Lion Air crash confirms that the pilot's lack of knowledge of MCAS was one of the key reasons for the plane crash. How frequently are new automated systems left out of the manual and training that you give to pilots?
Senator, first of all, one of the things we've learned from both of these accidents is that we need to provide additional information on MCAS to pilots. Just to give you context, as we develop our training manuals, our idea is to provide training on pilots so they can respond to the effects of failures as opposed to trying to diagnose failures. And that's a very important distinction. And so more information in the training manuals is not necessarily safer, but as we understand from both of these accidents, we need to provide more information on MCAS to enhance safety. But we do try to include information in the training manuals
but
that
do you think it's acceptable to have pilots flying planes without knowing about these key automated flight systems?
Yeah, Senator, again, our approach is to train pilots on the effects of a failure mode. So in this case, the MCAS automation system, when it fails in what we call a runaway stabilizer, uncommanded movement of the horizontal tail. That is what's in the training manual, and we try to train pilots to respond to the effect of the failure as opposed to diagnosing.
Okay, let me move on to two more quick things. After these terrible crashes have claimed 346 lives, do you think it makes sense for these aircraft to be allowed to fly in some countries and not others? Because the FAA says each country can make its own decision.
Yeah. Well, Senator, we respect the jurisdiction of the regulatory authorities around the world.
So you think it's acceptable? Just say yes or no.
Senator, that's up to the regulatory authorities. That's not a decision that we can make. We respect the authority of the regulators.
Okay, you're saying the same thing again, so I'm going to go with a yes. While there have been several factors that contributed to the plane crashes, one that is particularly troubling was highlighted in a recent article in the Washington Post, which found that the Lion Air had a faulty angle of attack sensor, which gave pilots and airplane systems unreliable information the day before it crashed. Do you think that's a problem, and what steps can be taken to change that?
Senator, in the case of the angle of attack disagree alert, we got the implementation wrong. I mentioned in my comments up front that we made some mistakes. We made a mistake on that implementation. Once we discovered it, our engineering teams quickly convened a safety review board. They confirmed that it wasn't an operational safety issue, and the FAA subsequently concurred with that. But nonetheless, we got the implementation wrong, and we've addressed the faults in the process. We have fixed that, and the angle of attack disagree alert will be standard implementation on all MAXs going forward.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, would like to recognize and offer my sympathies to the people that are here today and the people who are at home who have lost loved ones in these crashes. I hope that we can get answers at this hearing and also in the future so that these issues, these mistakes will not happen again and cause future loss of life. Mr. Muhlenberg, the Joint Authorities Technical Review notes that Boeing made several other changes to the 737 MAX that differ from the earlier models, such as structural changes that would accommodate the new engines that were planned on the plane and other advanced technologies. Senator Thune touched on this with the delegated authority. Was Boeing delegated authority over the certification of those changes as well?
Senator, I can't answer that question completely because, as you pointed out, there were a number of changes. Again, those are done and evaluated jointly with the FAA. John, if you want to comment on any specifics there.
There's approximately 92 certification plans associated with the MAX, which encompass all the different changes to the airplane. The FAA reviewed approximately 8 of those initially. And
are you looking into those certification processes as part of your review of the 737 MAX?
Senator, yes, we are. I asked my board to set up an independent review committee headed by Admiral Giambastiani about 5 months ago. And that committee did its work, provided inputs that we're acting on. And with the other authorities, we're continuing to take a hard look at that. And we look forward to taking action on those reports.
Okay. Also, the Joint Authorities technical review included a recommendation that states, quote, if any flight control surface is used in a novel manner, the FAA should be directly involved. This is based on the observation that the FAA was not completely unaware of MCAS, but because information and discussions about MCAS were so fragmented and they were delivered to disconnected groups within the process, it was difficult to recognize the impacts and the implications of this system. Do you agree that the communication between Boeing and the FAA is fragmented to the point that relevant information on MCAS was not provided to the agency? Is this what you were referring to when you talked about getting the balance right?
Senator, I think you raised some very good points there. I do think one of the areas we can improve, and we've seen it in the JATR report and others, is system-wide integration, cross-system integration amongst the different technical expertise areas, and improvements in documentation and communication. And again, we found some areas there where we should have done better.
Do you think those steps changes will improve your communication with the FAA?
Senator, I do.
Do you think the FAA has a responsibility to also change its process to improve communication?
Senator, I believe the FAA does, but I wouldn't say that's only the FAA's responsibility. We at Boeing need to make some improvements in communication, and we own that, and we're committed to doing that.
The Boeing 737 airplanes are based on a type certificate. That was originally provided in 1967, I believe, and it has been amended to address the different 737 models since then. That technical review notes that, quote, some elements of the design and certification remain rooted in the original 1967 certification of the Boeing 737-100. Does Boeing or the FAA review the elements of the 737 that are based in the 1967 certification for continued safety when new models of the airplane are produced?
Senator, if I could ask John to field that question.
Senator, as you know, there's a single type certificate for the 737, but as the design has evolved with each new generation of airplanes, the safety standards on which the airplane is designed to have also evolved. Yes, there are some amendments that the design might reference back to an earlier amendment level, but those are likely changes that have not changed in the family of airplanes since the original design. An example might be some of the structural elements. However, we have stepped up in many areas voluntarily to later amendment levels to demonstrate that it still meets the latest standards in compliance.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both our witnesses for being here today, and thank you, most important, to the relatives who have lost loved ones. If you could please stand so we could thank you all. Thank you for being here. If you could just stand. Thank you.
And go ahead and hold up the photographs that you brought. You've been very kind to.
I was going to ask that you hold up those photographs because I understand that for security purposes you can't during the hearing, but just for this short period of time. Mr. Muhlenberg.
So thank you. And if the timekeeper could start Senator Blumenthal's Time over. Thank you very much to the family members. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Muhlenberg, as I watched those loved ones stand, and frankly, as I reviewed this file over the past week or so again, and as I sit here today, my anger has only grown. These loved ones lost lives because of an accident that was not only preventable, as the chairman said at the very start, but was the result of a pattern of deliberate concealment. Boeing came to my office shortly after these crashes and said they were the result of pilot error. Those pilots never had a chance. These loved ones never had a chance. They were in flying coffins as a result of Boeing deciding that it was going to conceal MCAS from the pilots. And the best evidence is this message from Mark Faulkner saying, in effect, we're going to conceal MCAS, delete it from the manual used in training. When did you become aware of the fact that MCAS was not going to be included in the flying manual?
Senator, first, if I could express my my deep sympathies for the
You've
families.
done that, and my time is limited. I apologize for interrupting you, but I want to know specifically when you became aware of this effort.
Senator, I can't reference that email. I'm not
asking you about the email. You've been asked about the email already. I'm asking you about Boeing policy as reflected in this email. Its chief test pilot deciding he was going to mislead pilots who were then going to take passengers into the air, these loved ones, and turn those planes into flying coffins.
Senator, I'm not sure what Mr. Faulkner meant by that email. I can tell you that certification and training materials are not determined by one individual.
Well, in fact, let me just interrupt you again. In the over 1,600-page original flight manual of Boeing 737 MAX, the aircraft's new MCAS computer system was mentioned only once in 1,600 pages in the glossary of abbreviated terms. So when Boeing came to us and they said it's the pilots, inexperienced pilots, you were lying to us as well.
Senator, if I could try to respond to your question, first of all, the premise that we would lie or conceal is just not consistent with our values.
Well, I know it's not consistent with the values that you're articulating here, but let me just, since my time is limited, move on. Would you agree that this system of certification and oversight is absolutely broken? That's the lesson here, isn't it? That Boeing lobbied the Congress for more delegation, and now we have to reverse that delegation of authority. Would you support those legislative efforts?
Senator, again, I support taking a hard look at the delegated authority.
I'm not asking you for a hard look. I'm asking you for a commitment here because you have the opportunity to make things right.
Senator, I'm not familiar with particular legislation, but I am committed to working and supporting.
Boeing asked for the legislation that exists right now. Will you commit to supporting reform efforts such as many of us on this committee have advocated?
Senator, we'll commit to participating in those reform efforts and providing our inputs.
Well, I agree that your input would be valuable. I'm looking for input in support of reform that will stop outsourcing by the FAA. And I might just add, the FAA has been really disappointing in its disclosure to us. This is an example of the kind of disclosure the FAA has given us, total redaction I've asked for full disclosure of documents. The FAA has failed to provide them. I've asked for the FAA to return my phone calls. It's failed to do so. And I think the FAA is part of this problem as well. And it is the result, at the end of the day, of Boeing rushing this process. I'm using the chairman's term, putting profits over safety, rushing the certification process with you in charge of that certification and prioritizing speed and cost over safety. And my time has expired, but the folks who really deserve time here are the people who lost loved ones. And
thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Let's do this. This poster is entitled MCAS Lives in Both FCCs. If you can provide a copy of that, we'll admit it into the record at this point without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hamilton, let me just ask you, when it says MCAS does live in both FCCs, what does that mean?
Sure, certainly. So
briefly,
the MCAS function is replicated in the two flight control computers that are on board the airplane. And so each flight control computer previously received its input from one AOA sensor on the left or right side. In the software changes we're making going forward, now both flight control computers will receive the data from both sensors, compare it, and only if they agree, they will activate.
Okay, thank you. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Muhlenberg, have you determined that the failures that resulted in the tragic consequences, were they failures in the policies and protocols that Boeing had in place, or was it a failure to comply with those protocols and policies that resulted in these consequences?
Yeah. Senator, in some cases, we relied on these longstanding industry standards, policies, and certified to those, and we're now raising questions around those. That gets back to this pilot response time discussion that we had earlier. In some cases, we missed on implementation, as I mentioned earlier, with the angle of attack sensor. But overall, we did follow the certification process and steps. But nonetheless, we've learned from both of these accidents, and the fixes that we need to make are clear.
So the fixes are both in policy, and then making certain that the policies are followed once the new policies are in place.
Senator, I believe that both are true. Yes.
Thank you. And I assume there's other certification and just developments at Boeing that are always ongoing. Have you changed your behavior and or policies for the certification and development process for other pieces of equipment, other aircraft that Boeing is now proceeding towards certification?
Senator, we have, and we're going to continue to change. As I said, we have learned, but we're still learning. I mentioned earlier the change to our safety review board structure. That is a big substantive change. The stand-up of our new safety organization, the realignment of our engineering team, those 50,000 engineers. We're also taking a look at some of those long-standing assumptions behind how we design as we look at next-generation products like the 777X as an example. So we are taking a comprehensive approach to those updates.
As this committee looks certainly at certification, as we look at the FAA, what suggestions does Boeing have for this committee when you look at any policies or failures at the FAA? So the way I would view this is we have two major organizations involved in this process. One is the manufacturer, Boeing. The other is the federal agency that is there to certify. My assumption is that neither one did things right. And what have you learned about the FAA that we should know as we look at the FAA now and in the future?
Well, Senator, we have a great deal of respect for the FAA. I personally worked with the FAA for many years, have a great deal of respect for them and their professionals. I know the FAA is also taking a hard look at all of the reports and inputs and investigations and is committed to making changes. I think you've heard that from Administrator Dixon.
Do you have suggestions what changes the FAA should make?
Senator, I don't have specific recommendations for you, but we'd be glad to follow up on that if it'd be useful.
Thank you. Where are we now in the 737 MAX? It seems like every week there's a report that an airline believes they're going to have that plane flying again, or that certification is nearby.
Yeah.
What is the status?
Senator, we're in the final stages of the process. So we are currently testing the final software updates. When ready and with the FAA's approval, we'll proceed to a certification flight in the near term. Subsequent to that, it'll be the FAA's responsibility to evaluate that and issue an airworthiness directive. That's all work that we're proceeding on over the next few weeks and months. But I think it's important, again, that the airplane will return to service when it's safe. Right? This is not going to be timeline driven. We are committed to answering every question the regulators have, and the airplane will fly when everyone is convinced it's safe. That is the most important thing here.
It troubles me that to get to that point it's certainly not that it's taking so long. I want the result that you just described. We want the right circumstance before we're flying again. But it suggests to me that there were much more significant problems with the MAX 37 if it was previously certified, and yet now it takes so long. It's something more than just a glitch. It's something more than just a minor change. That makes me concerned about the process that allowed it to be certified in the first place. What am I missing?
Yes, Senator, I think you raise a very good point. Our initial effort early this year was focused on the MCAS updates that we've already talked about. Around the middle of the year, as we were evaluating all of the other inputs and data, we identified some additional safety enhancements that we could make, not something that was required for certification, but something that we thought while the airplane was grounded was the right thing to do and a safety enhancement. And rather than waiting to do that later after return to service, we as a company and with the FAA decided that we would take the extra time for those additional software updates. And that's the work we've been doing through the summer and into the fall. That's designed to add additional software redundancies throughout the flight control computers. That is the final software we're testing. What I want to convey here is this is really the culture of Boeing, and I understand the questions that are being raised, but when our teams find opportunity to improve safety, that goes to the top of the list. That's the top priority. And if it takes time, if it takes money to do that, that's where we're focused, and that's why it's taking longer than I think some anticipate.
I'd request your follow-up on your thoughts about the FAA. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran, Senator Markey, Senator Udall, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me begin also by expressing my sympathies to those who lost loved ones in the two 737 MAX crashes. And I'd like to thank the families that are here today for your continued attention to safety and for working to prevent future tragedies like we saw here. Over the years, our aviation system has become the safest in the world, but these tragedies certainly remind us that we cannot rest. Safety cannot be taken for granted. There is no doubt from what we've been hearing in the testimony here today that many mistakes were made and the consequences were unfortunately tragic. The reports from technical experts underscore that as technology becomes increasingly complex, the debate about how to move forward can't be simply about a one-size-fits-all regulatory regime versus a let the free market just police itself type of approach. I believe a new paradigm may need to be developed to address the regulatory challenges associated with very complex technology, and that's something this committee needs to weigh in very heavily into as we move forward. Mr. Muhlenberg, as you know, the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico killed 11 workers, lasted 87 days, and cost upwards of $65 billion. And in the wake of that disaster, it was revealed that the oil and gas industry had lobbied for the reduced safety precautions that could have prevented that disaster. We often hear in Congress about how much regulations cost industry. However, thoughtful regulation plays an incredibly important role in protecting the public. So I'm curious if Boeing's view on oversight has changed in the wake of this tremendous human tragedy, as well as the cost that this company is facing right now. Has your view changed? You talked in response to an earlier question about having a balance. Clearly something is wrong with that balance. Please let me know if your thoughts have changed recently.
Senator, my thoughts have changed. We have learned lessons from these two accidents, and the families that are here with us today, the pictures we saw, they're heartbreaking. They remind us of the importance of the work we do and the paramount importance on safety. That's what makes this industry great, and strong oversight is part of the fabric of our industry, always has been. And I think this should give us pause to take a hard look at that.
Well, the hard look, you said we need to look at the balance. Has the balance gone too far to allowing industry to police itself?
Senator, I don't know if I can characterize it that way. My sense is that we all have the same objective here. We all want the safest industry possible. That is our objective. And my sense is that we could look at the balance, that there are refinements that would be worthy. I think, technology...
Do you think it's out of balance now, based on what happened here? Do you think we have to not just take a look at it, but seriously understand that the balance is maybe out of whack if we delegate too much to industry and don't have a impartial eyes and make sure the regulatory regime is sufficient, that you truly have impartial eyes looking at these factors? But it's going to save lives, and you won't put a company through the cost that you have when you balance those regulations. Is it out of balance right now? Yes or no?
As Senator, again, I think it can be improved. I completely agree with you on the importance of strong oversight. Yeah, I've worked in this industry for more than 3 decades, from airplanes to spacecraft. People's lives depend on what we do, and strong oversight from the government is a key to our successful, the safety of our industry. So I think we have a shared objective there, and we will work with you on examining any improvements we can make. We have a mutual interest.
Mr. Melberg, the NTSB report indicated that the FAA and industry have historically used highly trained test pilots to verify the safety of new aircraft models rather than average pilots who typically have less experience. Does Boeing use pilots with average training and experience?
Senator, our Boeing test pilots are experienced, highly qualified pilots. We work with airlines, the FAA, the regulators, to bring other pilots in from around the world as part of the evaluation. But I think, as you're pointing out, as we look to the future, again, we want to make sure that the testing we're doing is representative of that future pilot population.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well. I want to say, first of all, to the families who are here, extending my sympathies, but also my gratitude for you coming forward through your pain to bring to us, to Congress, which is not an easy thing to do, your frustrations and probably stronger feelings in the loss of your loved ones. I will say that when Colgan Flight 3407 went down in Buffalo in the early 2009, the families that came forward to us, I was on Transportation Committee and the House side, made such an incredible impact and has made flying on our regional airlines much, much safer because of that. So hopefully that will be what the result of this is for you today and for all of us. Mr. Muhlenberg, particular attention has been called to the fact that Boeing, later in the development process of the MAX, revised the range of flight conditions that could lead to activation of the MCAS, but that Boeing did not notify the FAA of these changes at the time. This is troubling if in fact this is true. Was Boeing not obligated by the FAA to report changes like the ones I just described?
Yes, Senator, I believe you're referring to the low-speed extension of MCAS, and I've seen those same reports, but they do not reflect the facts. The extension of MCAS to low speeds was done in a rigorous way. It was done in a very visible way. There was testing done on that from the mid-2016 timeframe to the early 2017 timeframe, including flight tests with the FAA on board. The FAA was aware of the low-speed extension and ultimately certified that.
And I believe FAA leadership has publicly stated the same.
That's a false report then.
I believe it's a false report. I believe the low-speed extension was fully certified with the FAA.
Okay, another report that's been out in the media and among is that after the second flight went down, that Boeing actually actively lobbied the FAA to keep the planes in the air. Can you respond to that?
Senator, could you just clarify your question
Yes,
in terms
after the second plane went, the Ethiopian Air went down, that there was quite several countries had expressed had limited the flight of that plane. We had not done that yet in the United States. There's media reports that Boeing was actively lobbying the FAA to keep the planes in the air at that time in this country. Is that true?
Yeah. Senator, let me clarify what was happening in that time frame.
Could you make it brief, please?
Yes. We immediately after that accident reached out to the FAA and other regulatory authorities to understand what happened in the accident. What has made aviation safe is that we make decisions based on data. At that point, we didn't have data, and so we, with the FAA, were looking to understand what happened. There were early reports that the airplane had some kind of a low-speed, low-altitude problem that turned out to be incorrect. So we, with the FAA, were pursuing data to make a good safety-based decision. That was our position with the FAA. When data became available, satellite data that was referred to in the media, again, with the FAA, we came to a conclusion that there could be similarities between the two accidents, and that led very quickly to a decision to ground the fleet.
Well, I think, in retrospect, I think it was pretty obvious, and I don't want to say conclusively so, but there was a problem and a consistent problem. The other thing that's really bothered me about this whole thing, and I questioned this in the last committee hearing that we haven't, between the Lion Air crash and the Ethiopian Air crash, it defies logic to me that some of these folks who wrote emails or sent text messages did not come to you and to the expertise of the engineering of these engines and of these planes and say, this is what we were talking about. Why was there any reaction at all like that within your company after the Lion Air crash? And don't tell me because you didn't have the official report that would have maybe saved those people in that Ethiopian airplane.
Senator, I think about that decision over and over every day. And if we knew everything back then that we know now, we would have made a different decision.
Okay, the question then, did people come to you at the highest levels, at any level, and say, wait a minute, this is sounding familiar?
Senator,
yes or no?
Senator, after the first accident, we convened our broad technical team across Boeing. It wasn't any single individual or a small team. It was a broad team. We brought all those experts to bear, trying to assemble data from the accident, understanding what occurred. We quickly, with the FAA, issued an operational bulletin to remind everyone of the training and the emergency scenario that
around that particular system,
around what we called runaway stabilizer, which again is the effect of that system. And at the same time, we began work on an MCAS software update in that time frame.
So the answer is yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, just one point of clarification. Are you saying, Mr. Molenberg, the FAA did know about the 2.5 trim, not 0.6, but 2.5? The FAA knew about that?
Yes, Senator, you're referring to the low-speed extension, which is the 2.5-degree trim.
Yes.
That is the low-speed extension. The FAA did know about that.
Thank you.
Participated.
Senator Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member for having this hearing. And Mr. Molenberg, I first want to say to all the people that stood up that I'm very moved by you being here, and your losses are very, very, I think, heartfelt across the committee here. And, the thing that really bothers me is knowing that it's preventable. It makes it even more outrageous that we haven't made the kind of dramatic changes that I want to talk to the CEO here about. Mr. Molenberg, you showed some emotion when these folks stood up and everything, What should come from that emotion is some action to do something to really make a difference. And for this committee to coalesce around the solution that's really going to move us forward would require you to step forward and specifically say what you support. And I haven't seen you do that in all the questioning. You've been asked over and over again, what would you support? I mean, it's absolutely clear that it's too cozy a relationship with the FAA and your airline. And so what is it you're going to commit to specifically in terms of reform? That's why you're up here. And that's what we want to see you do, is to weigh in with us. This is what would make a difference. This is what would make it safer. This is what would make sure that we don't lose passengers like this in the future, or the crew.
Senator, while I respectfully don't agree with the characterization of coziness with the FAA, we respect the independent oversight of the FAA, and that's very important to us from a safety principle standpoint. We have taken a number of internal actions that we think are meaningful as they relate to our own internal reforms on safety. We are engaged in the legislative process, and Senator, I appreciate your invitation for us to be involved in that. I know there are many stakeholders. As you heard from me earlier, we are committed to strong oversight in the aerospace industry. It's part of what makes this system safe. We have a shared objective, and if there are things we can do to make it better, we will. I don't know, John, if you have any specific ideas there.
Yeah, Senator, I would say that, one of the big issues was we used an industry standard assumption on pilots and how they would react, and that proved incorrect in these two accidents. So in terms of things that I think we need to change with the FAA is we need to go revisit some of these regulatory guidances and make sure that they're up to date. I would even tell you that there's probably some regulations that we advocated as part of the FAA reauthorization bill, 10 regulations that FAA should work with industry to update based on technology that's out there today.
Well,
but in terms of coziness, I used to be the lead administrator for the ODA, and I can tell you that we have a respectful relationship with the FAA, but we do have our differences of opinion sometimes. But we discuss those, we work it out on how we're going to comply, and it's not a cozy relationship. It's a professional relationship.
Well, it's a relationship that didn't work for the consumers in this and for your employees that went down in those flights. You and others in your company blamed the deceased pilots and the culture of the countries where the crashes occurred for the accidents. But from what we've seen in the last year since the first crash, it appears that Boeing's own culture is more blameworthy for installing a faulty system that resulted in too many deaths and could have caused more. This culture starts at the top, and that's why I've been asking you for the specifics of what you support. And I hope after this hearing you will come forward and when there's legislation out there, say this is going to make it better, and come up here and spend some time to build the consensus to get this done. Because I think the large, powerful interests that are a part of this don't want any reform. They want you to tinker around like you're talking about, but they don't want to see any reform. If Boeing could not guarantee that pilots were prepared to fly these jets, your company should not have sold them. Did anyone at Boeing question, hesitate, or raise any issues prior to selling the 737 MAX 8 with this software to Lion Air or Ethiopian Air?
Senator, first, we look forward to responding to your request there and providing inputs on the reforms. To your question, we do rely on the airlines and the regulatory authorities around the world as part of this integrated system to make sure we're fielding airplanes and crews that can fly safely. I do think it's important for me to clarify a point that you made earlier. We have not blamed the pilots, and I know that's been reported, but that is not our company position, and it never will be. We are responsible for our airplanes. We are responsible, and we own that, regardless of cause. Any accident with one of our airplanes is unacceptable.
Well, that change is welcome, but that about the culture went out from your company early on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Udall. Let's do this at this point. Mr. Mullenberg, the JADR published 12 main recommendations. Will both of you get back to us on the record and tell you Boeing's position with regard to these 12 recommendations?
Senator, we will.
Thank you. Senator Markey is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by recognizing the families who lost so much on this flight. Many of you are here today, including Michael Stumo and Nadia Milleron, the parents of Samia Stumo, a University of Massachusetts Amherst graduate and a resident of Sheffield, Massachusetts, who was tragically killed on the Ethiopian flight. The losses that the Stumo family and all of the families suffered is absolutely inexcusable, and we will remember that as we are moving forward in the drafting of legislation. We will do it in the memory of your families. One thing is clear: to make sure that safety is our top priority is to guarantee that every aviation safety measure is built into every plane and that it is never for sale. Unfortunately, our current laws only prevent aircraft manufacturers like Boeing from selling critical safety elements for an additional price. Existing rules allow companies to charge extra for non-critical safety enhancing features, and Boeing actually does charge more for those technologies. The 737 MAX aircraft involved in the Indonesian and Ethiopian crashes lack two safety enhancing features: an angle of attack indicator and a disagree light. Both of these technologies would have helped the pilots recognize that faulty sensor readings were causing the plane's automated flight control system to push the aircraft's nose down towards the ground. With that knowledge, the pilots may have been able to take more effective action to prevent these crashes. In fact, the Indonesian crash report released last week specifically cited the lack of a disagree light on the 737 MAX as contributing to the Lion Air tragedy. Shamefully, the law allows Boeing to treat these safety technologies as a la carte add-ons that airlines can obtain only by paying an extra fee. A la carte add-ons, safety. Not like XM radio or leather seats on a plane. Safety is a la carte. Safety is an added-on feature. These tragic crashes have made it all too clear that there should not be any distinction between critical and non-critical safety enhancing features. And that's why I've introduced my safety is not for sale legislation. My bill will require aircraft manufacturers like Boeing to offer or provide any technology that measurably enhances safety without an additional charge to airline carriers. If you believe that that safety should never be for sale, the question is, why was it? Now, you seem to now recognize that the disagree light should be standard, but you have yet to say the same thing about the angle of attack indicator and whether or not that should be offered for free, or whether or not each airline should be given the option of not building it into the plane for free. So I think you have to make a decision here in terms of where you're going to go, because otherwise your disagree light is still on, coming from Boeing towards these safety features. So I want, first of all,
this is the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science and Transportation. Boeing CEO testifying there. We want to get an update on what we've heard so far from our Phil LeBeau. Phil.
If you look at this testimony over the last, hour and 15 minutes, however long it's been, for the most part, Dennis Muhlenberg has stuck to the script that we expected him to stick with, which is, we understand that we made mistakes. We are going to rectify the situation in the future. We will learn from this. We have learned a painful lesson here. He has only had really hard questions from a few of the senators, Senator Shelley Moore Capito as well as Senator Blumenthal. Both of them really hit at the main question, which is, when did you know that this was an issue, and should you have been alerted sooner? in the development and the building of the very first couple of Maxes that the MCAS situation is one that could ultimately lead to a crash. For the most part, Dennis Muhlenberg handled those questions the way I expected him to, which was to say, we were working with the FAA, we went through the certification process, and if we can amend that in the future, we certainly want to amend it. So that's what we're seeing so far.
Hey, Phil, when Muhlenberg says, and here's the quote, "We have not blamed the pilots," does that reflect your understanding of their early defense?
They never came out and blamed the pilots, so technically he is correct there. But when you talked with people who were working on this, whether it was within Boeing or it was with the FAA, one of the things that they did bring up was, look, the relative lack of experience with these pilots, whether it was with Ethiopia or with Lion Air, was a factor. In other words, they were not responsible for the planes crashing, but it was a factor. And we saw this with the report from Lion Air, that there was just so much happening in the cockpit that their handling of the situation in the final minutes there, it was a factor that contributed to the crash. So you're walking a fine line here, Carl, where they did not blame the pilots, but everybody from the beginning has said the lack of experience with these pilots when it comes especially to MCAS was a contributing factor.
Phil, I'm curious about what seems to be the Wall Street reaction to this. I mean, Boeing stock is up 1%. It's sort of marched steadily higher since he has started testifying. Has anything that he has said really triggered this, or is it really more just a reflection of how he's handling these questions from senators?
And I also think, Morgan, that this is a reflection of the fact that after these next couple of days, the rest of today and then tomorrow when it's over on the House side, nothing's going to change with regard to the backlog that Boeing has with the 737 MAX, nor is anything likely to change over the next couple of years. And if you believe they will ultimately get this plane back in the air, certified by the end of the year, and then back in service early next year, you believe that this is almost a delayed cash flow situation where they're going to catch up rapidly in the next year. And as an investor, that's what you're focused on, not as much on the process and how Dennis Muhlenberg is handling these questions.
Our Phil LeBeau bringing us that needed perspective. Let's get back into this hearing. Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat from Illinois, now questioning the Boeing CEO.
So let me talk about what has happened here. You put a sensor on the outside of the aircraft, which is standard, but you allow that sensor to override the pilot's input in this system. So in every other 737 aircraft, there is the function of you can pull back the pilot, the cutout, and that will override that uncommanded nose down attitude. That is standard. That is the basic assumption. As you said, you use an industry standard on how a pilot would react to a malfunction like that. Uncommanded nose down, every pilot, including helicopter pilots, you pull back. But what you did was you put an MCAS system into an aircraft. You didn't tell the pilots that this MCAS system was in there, and you put in a function in order for MCAS to work the way you want it to work. After the pilot does the uncommanded reaction to the uncommanded nose down, in every other 737 cutout, that's the end of it. In the 737 MAX, after 5 seconds, the system resets and it pushes the nose right back down. The pilots had exactly 3 seconds to pull nose down, pull up. Now we got to do a new procedure that did not exist in previous 737 models, which is the electronic cutout switch, because you have now put into a system that overrides the pilot in command of that aircraft. So you've been telling this committee that, yes, you use basic pilot reactions. That is true. But you've not been telling this committee the whole truth. Time and again, this is my frustration. Boeing has not told the whole truth to this committee and to the families and to the people looking at this. Yes, the pilots did exactly what they were supposed to do. But 5 seconds later, especially if that sensor is still stuck, it overrides what the pilot does and it pushes the nose right back down again. 3 seconds. A pilot's best friend is time and altitude. And on takeoff, there is no altitude. And he's got no time. You set those pilots up for failure. And when I sent you a letter asking you to answer several questions, it took Boeing over 5 months to respond to my question. I only got the answers the day before you and I met. And one of the questions I asked was, what date did Boeing discover that a stock angle of attack vein would result in MCAS issuing persistent commands with unlimited authority to trim the airplane nose down? In layman's terms, if this vein is stuck, MCAS will continue to provide faulty directions and will keep pushing that nose down over and over and over again. No matter how many times an experienced 737 pilot pulls back on the yoke, 5 seconds later, reset, nose back down. You knew in 2016 that this was happening. And your team at Boeing decided we didn't need to fix that because of well-understood piloting techniques and procedures. But the problem is that well-understood piloting technique and procedures is to pull back, and that's it. But you added something else. You put in a system and you didn't tell pilots about, and then you put in an override by resetting the system 5 seconds later. Boeing is the company that built the Flying Fortress that saved Europe. I remember watching B-17s fly above the ground. It is a storied aircraft that has rescued the free world. And yet, you knew about these problems and you continue to put them into the system into place. And when we asked you to answer these questions, you have told this committee and you've told me half-truths over and over again, including in that meeting. This is why I am so upset. You've not told us the whole truth, and these families are suffering because of it.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Members of the committee, at this point, Senator Scott is deferring his time to the chairman of the subcommittee, Senator Cruz. You're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Muhlenberg, I have to say the testimony here today has been quite dismaying. I want to focus on the text exchange that has been referred to and has been publicly reported on. This was a text exchange between Mark Faulkner, who was then Boeing's technical pilot for the MAX, chief technical pilot for the MAX, and Mr. Gustafson, who in 2018 was promoted to being Boeing's 737 chief technical pilot. Is that right?
I believe that's the case, Senator. Yep.
So this exchange is stunning. Mr. Faulkner, oh, shocker alert. MCAS is now active down to M2. It's running rampant in the sim on me. At least that's what Vince thinks is happening. Gustafson's response, oh, great. That means we have to update the speed trim description in Volume 2. Mr. Faulkner, so basically I lied to the regulators unknowingly. Gustafson, it wasn't a lie. No one told us that was the case. Faulkner, I'm leveling off at like 4,000 feet, 230 knots, and the plane is trimming itself like crazy. I'm like, what? Gustafson, that's what I saw on Sim 1. But on approach, I think that's wrong. Faulkner, granted, I suck at flying, but even this was egregious. That exchange describes what happened in Lion Air and Ethiopian Air. The men and women who are gathered here with the photos of your loved ones, 346 people are dead because what these chief pilots described as egregious and crazy, that's their language. That's Boeing's internal language in this exchange. Now, what I find truly stunning, Boeing handed this exchange over to the Department of Justice in February. In March, I chaired a hearing of the Aviation Subcommittee on these two crashes. Boeing did not see fit to give this committee that exchange, nor did Boeing give it to the FAA or the Department of Transportation. But what I find most stunning is your testimony here today that you said you first learned of this exchange a couple of weeks ago. These are senior leaders at Boeing in an exchange saying, and I will quote again, So I basically lied to the regulators. Look, I've practiced law a lot of years. You had your lawyers look over this document, and they read a senior leader after these crashes has occurred saying they lied to the regulators. Mr. Mullenberg, how in the hell did nobody bring this to your attention in February when you produced this to the Department of Justice? How did you just read this a couple of weeks ago?
Senator, again, to clarify my earlier comments, I was made aware of the existence of this kind of document, this issue, as part of that discovery process in the investigation early in the year, as you pointed out. At that point, I counted on my counsel to handle that appropriately. And
did you read this exchange? Look, I was made aware documents were being produced, that is passive voice and disclaiming responsibility. You're the CEO. The buck stops with you. Did you read this document? And how did your team not put it in front of you, run in with their hair on fire, saying, we got a real problem here? How did that not happen? And what does that say about the culture at Boeing if they didn't give it to you and you didn't read it? And if you didn't say, I want to read and see what happened? Your testimony here earlier today is, well, we're not sure what they were talking about because he's not at Boeing anymore. How did you not in February set out a 9-alarm fire to say, we need to figure out exactly what happened, not after all the hearings, not after the pressure, but because 346 people have died and we don't want another person to die?
Senator, as you mentioned,